Shoulder, can you ask them to keep that off? It's right.
I just There's something out cuppa for you now, mate.
You want me to go?
No, where's our, we got nobody on the time.
Who is it meant to be?
Should we ask Vicky?
I don't know who it's meant to be.
Ready on that line?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Turn your phone noise off.
Okay, that's fine.
Congress, I call Congress to order. Good morning, Congress. Oh, I think we'll try that again. Good morning, Congress. Yeah, you're here. Good. So we start by saying the programme of music this week has been put together by Music for Youth, and my thanks today go to MCHUGH Colne Valley Senior Guitars, who've been playing for us this morning. Thank you. Congress, as you know, we lost a little bit of business at the end of yesterday's session. That business was paragraph 19 and motion 77, food security and sustainability. So I'll let you know when I'm able to reschedule that business. I wanted to just give you a quick reminder that to ensure that we get through all the business, it's really important, please, to respect speaking times. I remind you again, 5 minutes for moving a motion, 3 minutes for seconding a motion, and all other speakers, and I really appreciate your cooperation. Delegates, in a change to the published business, we turn to section 4. So it's section 4 of the General Council report, Good Services, the section on privatisation. That's page 48 on your report. I call paragraphs 4.1, 4.3, 4.7 and composite motion number 7, public services outsourcing, lessons from Carillion. The General Council support the composite motion. It will be moved by UNISON, seconded by Unite, supported by the POA and ASLEF. I have other speakers from the GMB, PCS and CWM Prospect. Can all of you please go to the front so that we have you ready? UNISON, we're ready for you to move.
President, Congress, Dave Prentice, General Secretary of UNISON, moving Composite C. And Congress, 30 miles from here lies an unfinished building, the new Royal Liverpool Hospital. So important to this region, a £300 million building site abandoned by Carillion as the company crumbled to dust. Carillion, a private company lauded by Tory and New Labour governments alike, a private company supposedly too big to fail, but now leaving workers unpaid, apprentices sacked, the absolute tragedy of thousands of workers worried about whether they still have jobs, their family security wiped out overnight with their future crashing down on them. The collapse of Carillion, the failed dogma of privatisation. That Liverpool Hospital, an epic monument to the trail of destruction wrought on our communities. Congress, where Grenfell will forever be associated with neglect, so Carillion will be forever associated with greed. Privatisation, Thatcher's baby, adopted and nurtured by New Labour. Taking from the needy and giving to the greedy, the pinnacle of vulture capitalism, leaving chaos, waste, human tragedy in its wake. Companies like Capita, G4S, Carillion, feeding off taxpayers' money, the money of our members, and in return, giving vulnerable people the bare minimum service that they could get away with. Privatisation unleashed by Thatcher mutated under New Labour. Gullible New Labour ministers, sucked in, bedazzled by chief executives of multinationals who over endless dinners promised so much but delivered so little to our communities. And their doctrine, privatisation, the holy grail, the panacea. Public services would be more efficient and they would be cheaper too. Cheaper? More efficient? Congress, I didn't buy it then, and I don't buy it now. Cheaper? PFI hospitals and schools, the equivalent of buying a house on Barclaycard. More efficient? Tell that to the elderly person, the elderly people shunted around private care homes, as hedge fund managers see them not as care homes, but as real estate to be sold off. The people living in them, collateral damage. Congress, that's privatisation. And more efficient? Tell that to the vulnerable citizens in our communities who need care at home. Care workers restricted to 15 minutes visits to wash, feed, medicate, and just be a friend to those in need. And what do they get in return? A minimum wage, they're tagged, they're not paid unlawfully for travelling time. Congress, that is privatisation. And now we have the creation of subsidiary companies, subcos as they're called. Cleaners, catering staff, admin staff, shoved out of the NHS, forced into worse terms, worse pensions, the same crucial jobs, but for less, far less. And all so the trust can have a VAT tax scam. Congress, that's privatisation of our National Health Service. And we're opposing it with industrial action. And from this platform, I congratulate our members here in the North West, in Wigan, in Wrightington, in Lee, who took weeks of its strike action, and they stopped the privatisation. And never forget the academies, like Bright Tribe, allegedly siphon off hundreds of thousands of pounds from our children's education. Watch Panorama tonight and see where it leads. Academies swindling our kids' education. Congress, that's privatisation. We're fighting a disease which ruins lives, creates poverty and hardship. It's a disease that even our National Health Service cannot treat, and its technical term, neoliberalism. It's privatisation, it's outsourcing, it's PFI, and Congress. That is why we call on our Labour Party, our party that grew out of the trade union movement, to act. Our predecessors wanted a party of government, united not by threats, united not by intimidation, united not by fear, but by the power to inspire. And we need our party to end privatisation as a day one commitment from the very start. And we do not want weasel words, but real action to end the disease of neoliberalism, the greed of privatisation. Congress, we need our party united in Parliament, in government, in power. Congress, I move.
We'll unite.
Thank you. GAIL CARTMAIL Unite, seconding the composite. Congress President, who among us would disagree that the culture of outsourcing must end? A culture that is really an ideology, creating a race to the bottom on pay and of services, lining the pockets of company executives. Outsourcing undermines collective bargaining, and we see key workers on the lowest pay possible, the working poor. I want to concentrate on Carillion, whose implosion must not be understated. It was the greatest corporate failure in the history of our country, not a rogue one-off. Future failures of other companies who operate similar business models is a very real risk. Carillion mutated from a construction company to an entity with tentacles throughout the public sector, acting like a Ponzi scheme with a constant need for new contracts to offset losses. Last year, when already trading while insolvent, it was paying record dividends to shareholders. And how did this happen? Carillion's finance director, Richard Adam, introduced a highly dubious so-called aggressive accounting practices. I'm advised not to say this was cooking the books, so I won't. But Congress, projects which were losing millions were shown making a profit on paper. How is this legal? Carillion's auditors and other directors turned a blind eye, and Richard Adam knew what he was doing. At 59, he retired before Carillion hit the skids, and he cashed in £750,000 worth of shares. Nice work if you can get it. And we mustn't forget the government's role. When the company was already in meltdown last year, they awarded it £2 billion worth of new contracts, a vote of confidence which falsely flagged to Carillion's suppliers it was a going concern. Yet weeks later, 3,000 Carillion staff and many more from its supply chain lost their jobs. At the very beginning of Carillion's collapse, Unite said, Carillion is not a one-off, and that is why we demanded an inquiry, and that's why we demand an inquiry now. And Congress, 8 months later, after Carillion's collapse, the Insolvency Service is only just beginning to investigate if laws were broken. This is too little, too late. There must be an immediate criminal investigation into Carillion, and we, the trade union movement, must lead that call. If no laws were broken, then we need better, stronger laws. We owe that to the workers and apprentices who were dumped without warning, and we owe it to the workers who could face a similar fate. Thank you, Congress. I second.
I call the POA.
President, Congress, Mark Fairhurst, National Chair, POA. Comrades, the POA ask you to support this motion, and we need your help on two fronts. One, to end the privatisation of public sector, and two, to stop the privatisation of our prisons. Comrades, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we had a public sector that we could all be proud of, with adequate staffing levels, sufficient investment, and a retirement age that afforded us dignity in our latter years. And we all lived happily ever after. But then, along came the Tories. And in 2014, it was the POA who warned government not to outsource the contracts for the maintenance of our prisons. But they told us and told the general public that it would save the taxpayer over £113 million. And in 2015, they awarded those contracts to Carillion in the south and the equally incompetent Amy in the north. We had to call a call centre to log repairs, but the phones were always engaged. And then they said, log on to a computer and do it that way. But it took us half an hour to do that. And we knew that repairs weren't getting carried out. How did we know? Because our members on the Landons got attacked by frustrated prisoners because after 4 weeks, in the depths of winter, the window hadn't been repaired. Or after 4 weeks, the toilet still wasn't working. And we bore the frustration from those prisoners. You see, the facts speak for themselves. Outsourcing is a good deal for business, but a bad deal for the taxpayer, service users, and employees. And when outsourcing fails, as we've just witnessed, the taxpayer picks up the bill. Well, I say, public sector work for public sector workers. We also have to contend with PFI, another failed concept. And I think it's abhorrent that the newest build prison, which is about to be built at Wellingborough, will be funded by the taxpayer. And the public sector won't even be allowed to bid for it. So the taxpayer is going to fund a new build prison and hand it straight to the profiteers. So for the next 25 years, we'll be picking up that bill. And even more abhorrent, this government have announced that every new build prison in the future will be built on PFI, and the public sector will not be allowed to bid. Well, I'm calling on you, Congress. Unite and fight with the POA and end privatisation now. And we demand an independent inquiry into privatisation, because we've had enough. We've had enough of failure in our prisons, failure in our NHS, failure in our probation service, failure on our railways, failure in our IT systems, failure in our social care, failure in our schools. Unite and fight, Congress. End outsourcing, end privatisation, public sector work for public sector workers. Demand an independent inquiry into this shambles, the shambles of privatisation. End it now. Please support.
Thank you, POA. I call ASLEF. Can I have GMB and PCS ready after that? Thank you. Can I just remind everyone now it's 3 minutes? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. President, Congress, Dave Kelf, ASLEF, rising to support Composite 7. Congress, firstly, ASLEF sends our solidarity to all workers who have been affected by the collapse of Carillion. Time and time again, private companies have been brought in to run our public contracts. Politically, the mantra has been private good, public bad. And finally, we have a Labour leadership that is opposed to continued privatisation of our services. We are told that the profit motive will make them efficient, that they have knowledge and expertise that the public sector does not. Well, which really means lower pay, worse terms and conditions and pensions for those workers, and a poorer service for the people that receive it. In our industry, the railways, we have had the same rail route the East Coast default and hand back the keys 3 times since rail privatisation. The last failed operator, Virgin Trains East Coast, avoided paying more than $2 million in franchise premiums back to the government. To hide their embarrassment, the government is also rewriting contracts through direct awards with train operators at the cost of the taxpayer. The government have even privatised the train operator of last resort, directly operated railways, who used to be part of the Department of Transport. That's how dogmatic they are about keeping our railways privatised. Trade unions have consistently warned against privatisation and outsourcing, but despite the mounting evidence and experiences of our own members and the British public, the government continue to repeat the same mistakes. There is only one reason for this: free market political dogma. We must learn from our mistakes. The market has failed to provide quality public services and value for money. Let's put our services and our people first. Congress, please support.
Thank you, Aslef. GMB.
President Congress, Neil Derrick, GMB. Many unions in this hall have first-hand experience of the failures of privatisation and outsourcing. None more so than the GMB members working in the water industry, living as they do with the legacy of one of Thatcher's earliest experiments. Our members have seen up close what happens when a public service is run instead in the interests of spivs, speculators and fat cats. Pensions and pay under attack, workforce numbers squeezed, what used to be 2-person jobs now done by 1. But of course, health and safety risks don't matter if the employer wants to lower employment costs and even more money for shareholders. Customers pay the price too, with higher bills, burst and collapsing pipes, and a service stretched to breaking point. Since 1989, the average water bill in England and Wales has increased by 40% above inflation. At a time when working people are struggling to make ends meet, they are paying the price for a public service that is no longer focused on the public. Let's not forget that these companies are private monopolies. There is no competition. We all need water and they supply it. Those at the top of these companies have been given a licence to print money. GMB research has revealed that in the last 5 years, the chief executives of England's 9 privatised water companies each took home an average of £1.2 million through their annual salary, bonuses, pensions and shares. The shareholders too are laughing at us. They've pocketed £6.5 billion over the past 5 years, money that could and should have been invested in improving our water infrastructure, tackling leakages and employing more people. And the leakages in England's privatised water industry are a scandal. Every day, 2.4 billion litres of water are lost. And this won't be the last long, hot summer, and water shortages will be here to stay unless we take action. So GMB's Take Back the Tap campaign aims to tackle the failures of privatisation by returning England's water companies back to public ownership. Labour and the public are fully on board. In Congress, privatised water has failed and is failing. It's bad for the customer, bad for workers, and bad for our environment. Let's take back the tap. Thank you. Support the motion.
Thank you. I'm going to call PCS. Could I have CWU Prospect? And I also had a speaker indication from NEU. I don't know if they're at the front. If they want to speak, come down. So PCS, the floor is yours, followed by CWU Prospect and then NEU.
President Congress, Kevin McHugh from PCS to support the motion. Since the Thatcher era, successive governments have relentlessly pursued a privatisation agenda. The neoliberal ideology that's dominated the UK for over 3 decades now is one that shifts valuable public assets and services to the hands of the private sector. It's led to a race to the bottom by employers that seek to weaken job security, reduce pay and degrade terms and conditions. Huge swathes of taxpayer money has been transferred to line the pockets of shareholders and fat cat bosses. Since 2010, privatised companies have paid more than £37 billion in dividends to shareholders. This huge sum of money could have been used to reinvest and improve public services. And as a union, PCS has called for the interests of all workers to be safeguarded for the scandal of privatisation to be halted. Our members in Land Registry, the body that sells and regulates house sales and land sales, have actually fought off privatisation twice. So it can be done, It's not inevitable. If you organise and you fight, you can actually win. And they'll probably come for them again, and we're ready for them. The Carillion collapse is a striking example of the failure of the privatisation model that we've seen in recent years. Despite offering 3 profit warnings in the 6 months before its collapse, Carillion was awarded another 3 contracts worth nearly £2 billion. Even its death throes, Carillion allowed for those in the private sector to gorge on the in the first 8 weeks, for instance. PricewaterhouseCoopers earned £20 million in the first 8 weeks, and they're expected to earn £50 million for the collapse of Carillion. It's a disgrace. Privatisation specialises in failure. It fails the workers. It fails those who rely on the services, and it offers appalling value for money for taxpayers. At our conference this year, we passed a motion saying that we press on private sector contracts to have at least the same job security, pay and terms and conditions as those available in service provision departments. We welcome Labour's call to end the racket that is outsourcing, which is fleecing taxpayers, exploiting workers and rewarding failure. Let's nationalise the railways. Let's nationalise the utility companies. What we've got to do, comrades, is fight back. Fight back against it. It's a rip-off. Support the motion.
Thank you very much. CWU? I'm just checking. There you are. I've been wondering where you were. Thank you.
President, Congress, Rob Wotherspoon, CWU. Just talking about this as being involved in the privatisation of the industry. I work for Royal Mail, which was undoubtedly the showpiece privatisation of the last 10 years of the Tory coalition government. And this privatisation started as they meant to go on with something that would have been regarded in any sensible political culture as an act of great robbery of the general public, because not only was a service that had been in the public hands for 497 years sold off, but it was sold at a knockdown price, allowing large speculators to sell at the actual price and trouser the proceeds, benefiting to the tune of an estimated £1 billion. And since then, the picture has been predictable, with a further £1 billion flowing out to private shareholders, whilst the employer has sought to put the pressure on frontline staff, closing sorting offices, selling off a further £195 million worth of assets, and all the while raising the prices on the public. And after 30 years of failed privatisations, is anyone honestly surprised by that? Privatisation is first a robbery of public assets and mean to generate wealth for the already wealthy. But secondly, it represents the belief of free market fanatics that only the market should be able to govern society, and that anything that seeks to put democratic checks on that is a threat to profit. But what we would also have to recognise is that what we had before privatisation was not a utopia. In Royal Mail, through deregulation and competition, our members faced a privatised environment in a public company. So when we talk about renationalisation, it must mean something more than simply moving the share certificates from the hedge funds into the UK Treasury. Otherwise, it'll just be a case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. That's why the CWU welcomes the commitments from the Labour leadership to look at new models of ownership which allow more democratic involvement and ownership by workers. That way, we can unlock the potential of working people to have a real democratic input into their working lives. Renationalise Royal Mail.
Thank you. I call Prospect to be followed by the NASUWT. My apologies for not seeing you. I then have, I think, the NEU wanting to come in on a paragraph. Is that right? Who have I got? Okay, thank you. Prospect.
President Conference, Jeff Fletcher, Prospect Union. The collapse of Carillion tells us many things. One, the doctrinaire view that the private sector is good and the public sector is bad is not true. Two, through contracting out to drive down costs, the private sector doesn't own the risks carried with the delivery of the services. It is the taxpayer who has to pick up the tab when things go wrong. Contracting out has created a democratic deficit whereby we are unable to hold the private sector companies to account properly in the same way we would do if those services were delivered in the public sector. Prospectors members who continue to pay the price for the collapse of Carillion, either through the loss of jobs or through eroded terms and conditions, including access to pension and redundancy entitlements, despite assurances given at the time of contracting out by the government. The public clearly have a right to quality public services that are responsive and accountable, but also our members have a right to fair treatment and reward, and the promises made should be promises that are delivered. The government clearly needs to move away from following its dogmatic approach to outsourcing. Policy decisions should be made through evidence. The benchmark should be in-house delivery based on evaluation, proper risk evaluation, with public interest and proper oversight being paramount. Prospect has members who deliver public services in the private sector, so we mustn't forget that we represent members there and not tarnish them. I support.
Thank you very much. I call the NAS. UWT.
President, Congress, David Kitchen, NAS UWT, the Teachers Union, speaking in support of Composite 7. Congress, the impact of austerity, the policy of savage, unnecessary and punitive cuts in spending on the services on which people rely, and the slashing of jobs, terms and conditions and pay of the workers who deliver these services is well documented, including by the TUC. The impact of privatisation is less well documented, although as public sector workers we know its impact. I'm here today to present the impact of a particular form of privatisation, academisation, on the education sector. Academisation was the first policy to be implemented by the 2010 government and has involved the removal of millions of pounds of public assets from democratic local authority control, and also the removal of hundreds of thousands of teachers from their statutory pay and conditions framework. Despite government claims, the Academy programme has failed children and young people and its own workforce. The DfE's official statistics show at Key Stage 4, over half of multi-academy trusts had pupil progress scores that were below the national average for state-funded mainstream schools. 76% of multi-academy trusts had an EBAC attainment at grade 5/C or above rate, which was below the national average for all state-funded mainstream schools. The DfE's most recent data show that in the secondary phase, classroom teachers' salaries are £1,200 lower in academies than in local authority maintained schools. In the primary phase, classroom teachers' salaries are £1,500 lower in academies than in local authority maintained schools. However, whilst pay levels for teachers have been slashed, academisation has enabled some people to become phenomenally wealthy at the expense of our children and young people and the Academy's workforce. In the academy sector, there is a lack of effective government regulation leading to greed and excesses becoming widespread. For example, the Department of Education chooses only to group all salary levels of 150,000 plus into one category when reporting Academy Trust leadership pay, when the highest paid Academy Trust managers earned an annual salary of between £420,000 and £430,000 in 2015-16. 29 individual Academy schools paid at least one manager over £150,000 last year, and one of these schools only had 355 pupils. In the same year, £170 million was paid out by academies to consultants, and only 50.1% of academic expenditure was spent on employing teachers. These are the government's own figures, a condemnation of government policy since 2010. Congress, we cannot allow our children and young people and the school's workforce to continue to be victims of this government policy. It is now time for independent inquiry, which this motion calls for. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you. I call the NEU. And thank you for your patience.
Amanda Martin, National Education Union, and President and Conference, thank you for allowing me to be the second woman to speak on this debate. This government is trying to persuade voters that privatising public services makes them more effective. They are trying to persuade parents that privatising schools by destroying local authorities and academies makes them better. The government is adamant that making schools compete, making teachers compete, and making students compete makes schools better. But it's pretending that in general it's making good places for students. But Conference, it is our job to explain and to prove to the public why privatisation and competition doesn't make anything better. We have the research, we have the evidence, and we have the arguments. Schools are public places. Schools are public spaces. We need schools, we need children's centres, we need youth clubs, and we need adventure playgrounds. We need libraries and we need parks. These must be public. Conference, these are our spaces. Privatising them does not lead to better outcomes. What it does is continue to the growing chasm of inequality and deepening poverty in this country. If we want to challenge inequality, if we want to reject the levels of child poverty in this country, and if we want to address health inequalities and education inequalities, we need to reverse privatisation. Privatisation fuels inequality, lowers pay, and threatens social justice. We must be clear about why we oppose it. Children and families in disadvantaged areas are paying the highest price from privatisation and the breakup of communities and community schools. Exclusion rates of deprived children in academies are soaring. Children with SEN and disabled children are stuck at home in a fragmented system which doesn't fit them. We need a decent, equal society, and this cannot be achieved unless we reverse privatisation and win the battle of ideas on public services. Comrades, it is our job collectively to stand up for the most vulnerable, for the most disadvantaged, and for the people in our country, and say no to privatisation and yes to the 7 Nolan principles: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and good leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking to UNISON. I heard no speeches against, so do you need your right to reply? No, thank you. I move us to the vote then on Composite 7. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, Congress. I move us then to Section 5 of the General Council report, Strong Unions, from page 58. I call paragraphs 5.1, 5.6, 5.8, 5.9 and motion 71, General Data Protection Regulations, otherwise known as GDPR. The General Council support the motion. It will be moved by the NASUWT, seconded by GMB. I have no other indication, so I call the NASUWT.
President, Congress, Chris Keats, NASUWT, the Teachers Union, moving motion 71 on the General Data Protection Regulations. I'm sure we all recognise the importance of GDPR in terms of protecting our rights to privacy as workers, as trade unionists, as consumers and as citizens. And GDPR has understandably generated public interest in what it will mean in terms of those who have access to our personal data and what organisations are able to do with it. The shocking data losses at Carphone Warehouse, I think, demonstrated how insecure our personal data actually is, and media reports of data breaches are now almost commonplace. And of course, we can't overlook the huge threat to democracy as a result of data misuse, as the revelations regarding Facebook and Cambridge Analytica confirmed. We now see global tech giants seeking to rebrand themselves, claiming that they are committed to putting our privacy and data security ahead of profits. But the question is, can we believe them? And is the motivation really to protect our rights and our privacy? Beneath the headlines, there's more and more evidence is starting to emerge of organisations misusing GDPR actively to circumvent our rights, including our employment and trade union rights. And it's not just the global tech giants or the multinational companies. In education, we're facing more and more examples of abuse of GDPR by employers. Employers claiming that because of GDPR, they can no longer agree to share statistical data collected from routine workforce monitoring or staff surveys, information that's often critical to identifying inequality or discriminatory practices, claiming that small workplaces, it will lead to the identification of individuals compromising their rights. Employers stating that it's necessary for unions to commit to data sharing agreements, which they confirm will comply with the employer's data protection instructions, and allowing employers to audit and inspect our data processing arrangements. Employers in redundancy situations, withholding information, including the names of employees in a particular workplace. Now, despite the best efforts of this government, there are legal rights that still protect our members in the case of job loss and discrimination and unfair employment and management practices. GDPR has not changed the redundancy provisions or the requirement for employers to comply with the Equality Act or to provide the necessary information on pay and rewards and other conditions of service. All of us here know there's nothing new about employers taking every opportunity to restrict or deny workers and unions their rights. GDPR is just the latest opportunity. We cannot allow these provisions to be abused and manipulated in this way. We need to oppose the data sharing agreements, which could limit our ability to represent and protect our members. We must challenge the attempts by employers to withhold information, undermining our ability to root out discriminatory practices or to protect jobs. In the rush to enact the data protection legislation on the 25th of May, critical statutory guidance needed to regulate employers was simply not produced. Congress, this motion commits the General Counsel to put pressure on the Information Commissioner to issue clear and unequivocal guidance to prevent employers abusing GDPR provisions to disadvantage workers and to block unions from exercising their rights. I move the motion and urge you to support.
Thank you. I call the GMB to second.
Morning Congress, Angela Gilrain and President, Angela Gilrain, GMB, first time speaker, first time delegate. GMB seconding motion 71, General Data Protection Regulations, or GDPR as we all know it. GDPR was intended to make people's information more secure in a digital age, and in an age where information is power, where so much information is shared and stored, it was intended to stop the misuse of data to ensure people's rights and freedoms are respected. No doubt, data protection is a serious business. Allegations of stolen elections and manipulation of public votes are usually significant and should rightly be protected, policed. Why GDPR was not intended for this is to stop democratic organisations that lead by for their members conducting for their day-to-day business. Lawyers are making a pretty penny, telling everyone what they can and can't do, but as a movement, they can never ever get back down on representing the interests of our members. We could all comply with every comma and full stop tomorrow by simply packing up shop and doing nothing, and that's not an option. No doubt, some employees who are already trying every trick in the book to frustrate and block us will seize and tightening of data rules to prevent us from communicating, recruiting and organising. We have even heard some employees try to put a fast one by using GDPR to revise contracts and with bogus self-employed workers with more demands and worse terms and conditions. That is not what the law was intended for. It is not what it says, and we must not allow any abuse of this legislation to go unchallenged. TUC must work with unions to challenge this. We must make sure that with our own movement we do not allow misrepresentation of GDPR to stop affiliation unions and the TUC doing the bread and butter work our members pay us for. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do the same. GDPR. It's a hard one, that one. Thank you. Right, I see no other speakers. NAS, do you need your right to reply? No, you don't. I'm going to move us to the vote. Can all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against, please show. That motion is carried. Thank you. I call paragraph 5.2 and motion 72, organising fast food workers. Casualised workers, blimey. I'm going to say that again. Motion 72, organising fast food workers. The General Council support the motion moved by the BFAWU, seconded by Unite. I know that I've got an indication from the NEU to come in on this debate as well. So can I call BFAWU, please, to move the motion? Thank you.
Comrades Ronnie Draper, Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, moving motion 72. Over the years, most of us in this hall have probably taken part in strike action, and the question might be asked, what's so special about the motion that's before you today? Well, on September the 4th, 2017, a handful of young workers from two McDonald's stores in Crayford and Cambridge took industrial action. They made history. It was the first one ever in the fast food industry. And the thing that makes it really remarkable is that they were fighting against the second biggest employer in the world and probably the biggest exploiter of workers' rights in the world. On May the 1st of this year, we extended that strike to Manchester and to Watford, and we took Watford in particular because it's the hometown of the Chief Executive, Steve Easterbrook. We've seen a fantastic campaign that's been run by Unite, which has seen a series of strikes across TGI, and I'm sure the seconder will include that. Later this year, the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union members in Wetherspoons will take strike action for the first time in the history of that company as well. Despite the greatest of pressures being applied by McDonald's, a less than sympathetic press, and a plethora of misinformation, these brave young workers won a great victory. There's no trades union recognition yet, no talks with management, and the press keep telling us that strikes don't work. Well, I'm going to tell you, all members went on strike for better pay, an end to zero-hour contracts, and to end bullying in the workplace, which included sexual abuse. The outcome of the strike saw the largest pay rise ever offered to workers within McDonald's. A pay rise that didn't just affect the two stores, it went right across the 119,000 people who were employed by the company. To me, that is a victory. The company have now started offering contracted hours to people if they want it. And that, again, is a victory. But, you know, we've also had our officials going in on grievances where we found that managers who bullied, who sexually harassed workers have now been dismissed from the company. And I see that as a victory. We have young people who are now engaged with trade unions in their workplaces because of the press coverage that was given. We're seeing the politicisation of young people ready to ensure their voices are heard. That, to me, is a victory. Above all, we're seeing trade unions working together to ensure that the most underrepresented group in society have someone to turn to. Comrades, this is a global campaign. It has grown out of the fight for $15 in America, out of the £10 Now campaign that we've run in this country, and of course the tremendous work that was done by Unite in New Zealand. It's backed by the IUF, it's backed by FAT, but I want to personally thank all the trade unions who've helped us in this room, both financially and with bodies on picket lines. It really does make a difference to these people. I want to thank Frances for the help that she's given directly as the General Secretary of the TUC, even trying to enlist the help of the Archbishop of Canterbury, although I think in this particular period, divine intervention didn't work. And I want to thank the leadership of the Labour Party, Jeremy and John. They, right from day one, have been involved in this campaign. They've encouraged people along the line and they've put stuff in their manifesto. But most of all, comrades, I want to thank those young workers who are leading the fight that will see trade union movement growing in the right direction. We ask that you all support the motion, but more importantly, speak to workers in the fast food industry. Let them know that the British trade union movement is behind them and working for them. Please support.
For Unite. Unite. Thank you.
Congress, Asif Mohammed, proud second this motion on behalf of Unite and in solidarity with striking TGI Friday workers. Congress, the August bank holiday marked a historic occasion. It was when young Unite members like myself showed the immense strength of courage to take on a multi-million-pound hedge fund-owned company. In Milton Keynes, Covent Garden and Stratford, they took to the picket lines for a historic fifth time, unshaken by the gross threats and intimidation of a management team hell-bent on crushing them. Their campaign is a response to an act which comes straight out the playbook of most bullying employers: wage theft. Wage theft by TGI Fridays announced with no notice, with up to 40% of waiting staff tips taken to top up the poverty wages of kitchen staff. Congress, this is a classic example of divide and rule. Bosses stealing from one group of workers to avoid paying another a fair wage. But there is a greater power than any desperate attack by bosses, and that is the power of solidarity. Solidarity over a wage theft that has left waiting staff up to £250 a month worse off. That's a lot of money for anyone, but especially if you're under 20 and only paid £5.90 an hour. And as we heard from the inspiring Lauren Townsend yesterday, young single mothers waiting tables at TGI's have been forced onto benefits because they just can't afford to put food on their own tables for their own children. And at the same time, TGI Friday CEO Karen Foster has awarded herself a gross 40% pay rise, while waiting staff have been left 40% worse off, lining her pockets with even more money to play golf on the weekends, while her own waiting staff struggle to make ends meet. But this has only strengthened the resolve of our members to fight, fight, and fight again in the great traditions of our militant fighting back trade union. Because Congress, the fight at TGI's isn't just about one restaurant chain. It's about rejecting the very idea of a muck job, rejecting the idea that young workers are disposable, that we can be chewed up and thrown away like a pack of fries at the convenience of some of the biggest businesses in this country. Our members also take strength from the knowledge that they are not fighting alone. The fight at TGI's is one part of a global fight by young workers across the fast food industry. In the United States, for example, the victories of the Fight for 15 by young workers has breathed new life into the trade union movement in that country. a direct riposte to the dangerous, naked nativism of Donald Trump. Congress, this campaign can be the spark that sets alight the wider service industry, bringing new members, new life and new energy into our movement. Congress, support this motion, support the fight of these young workers, support the fighting future of this movement, support this motion so in another 150 years the trade union movement still stands strong. Thank you, and solidarity forever. Thank you.
I call the EDU. I believe you have a question, I was told.
Hank Roberts, the NEU. President Congress, I raised questions regarding the General Council report, Strong Unions, Section 5.2. Our membership is the lowest proportion of the workforce in living memory. It has now been falling for decades. It is set to get worse, it says in the document, over 50, 40% density, 16 to 24, 7.8%. Has what we have been doing so far worked? Surely, Congress, the inescapable truth is it has not. So why, my question is, has it not worked? Is it that we have not yet found and implemented the best strategy? I believe we need a different, a more radical.
Hank, I am going to cut you off here. I'm waiting for one question.
Yes. General Council, Congress, I ask what can be done. It says we want more sectoral bargaining in the document. If so, then surely we need sectoral unions. Does it make any sense spending time, effort and members' money in competitive recruitment? Congress, are we not about combination and cooperation, not competition? John Monks first proposed this in his Millennial Challenge. He was right. It's not an easy task, but it's an essential task. Every worker should have a natural home in their union, an appropriate union, a single union. Is it not time we set about this task?
I think the short and sweet answer is yes. But to make the point, you're going to be having a much bigger debate this afternoon and hearing stuff about the work that we're doing around young workers this afternoon. So I hope that a lot of the points that Hank is raising there will be covered in the debates we have. I'm looking to the BFAWU. Do you need your right to reply? No. I'm going to move us to the vote then. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. Those against, please show. That is carried. I call motion 73, winning against atypical employment models. The General Council support the motion. It's to be moved by Balper, seconded by Unite. I have no other indications. Balper, the floor is yours.
Brian Strutton, British Airline Pilots Association, moving motion 73. Congress, the battle against bad employment will only be won by good, honest trade unionism. Government interventions can help, legal challenges can help, but at the end of the day, it is organised employees challenging their employer that matters. An example that I want to ask Congress to support is the continuing struggle for proper employee representation in Ryanair, where achieving recognition in the UK is far from the end of the story. The business side of the Ryanair airline has in many ways been remarkably successful, due in large part to its CEO Michael O'Leary's uncompromising approach to no-frills flying. And that same style has also at times manifested itself in Ryanair's approach to its 13,000 people, with a very high proportion of indirectly employed staff and a culture that has been described as bullying and dictatorial. On the other hand, Ryanair argues that staff have benefited from being in a growing company with stable work patterns. Well, it is a fundamental trade union belief that these two things are not mutually exclusive. There is no reason why a successful, growing company can't also be a good employer. That does not seem to have been O'Leary's view. How do you keep employees motivated and happy? He was asked. Fear, he answered. What about unions? In September last year, O'Leary said, hell will freeze over before Ryanair lets unions in, repeating their long-standing anti-union policy. But hell did freeze over. And just 3 months after that statement, in December last year, Ryanair announced that it was inviting pilot unions across its European operations to be recognised. One of the most staggering about-faces we've ever seen. What happened to bring this about? The answer is that Ryanair's own actions during last year were the final straw for many of their pilots who joined unions across Europe and forged social media groups to build an underground movement that united and rose up against Ryanair. It was not BALPA or the other unions, it was the pilots themselves joining together internationally. Ryanair, by their own admission, made a mess of their planning last year and had to cancel thousands of flights. O'Leary had a go at the pilots. He said, pilots get well paid for doing a very easy job. He said, are they hard worked? No. So more pilots left Ryanair. Those remaining became more angry. Ryanair offered them cash. But the pilots, united in their social media groups, refused the offer in many of their bases and instead, through the unions they had now joined, began threatening industrial action through self-organised pilot councils. You see, they didn't want money, they wanted respect. The pilots were ready to do business, but on their terms, not Ryanair's. Now the demand is simple. The pilots want Ryanair to engage with them as a single group and reach European-wide agreements to prevent a corporate divide and conquer approach. And note that in the recent Irish pilots dispute, Ryanair threatened to move their jobs to Poland. My advice to Ryanair is this: do what your pilots want. In a joined-up European operation like Ryanair's, it makes practical sense to have some core conditions set for all pilots in all countries, while other terms are set nationally. Pilots and their unions have established structures to do this, and I believe it is only a matter of time before Ryanair agrees. One of the immediate beneficial results of the pilot uprising has been the opportunity to put cabin crew recognition on the agenda as well, and some progress has been made there, but as with the pilots, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Saying you will deal with unions is a great step forward for Ryanair, but the reality behind that has to be proper, genuine negotiations in line with what the employees want, not what Ryanair dictates. So Congress, please support the motion.
Thank you, Balka. Seconded by Unite.
President, Congress, Diana Holland, Unite the Union, seconding motion 73, winning against atypical employment models. Conference, as Unite's Assistant General Secretary for 250,000 transport workers, and having been a union official for 30 years, I think this is a moment to recognise. Unlike Brian, I'm going to say hell hasn't frozen over. The world is still turning, and Ryanair has recognised trade unions. 150 years on from the founding of our TUC, to all those who have prematurely written us off, we can say loud and clear, we are relevant and we are needed. And whatever the latest employment model may be called, exploitation is exploitation, and the race to the bottom is no way to run an industry. Ryanair workers do not want to be isolated, afraid. They want a collective voice, collective strength, and collective bargaining. And this traditionally hostile, anti-union employer has had to recognise that this anti-union model has failed and they need to change. Something they told us when we met for the first time in Dublin, following years of doing everything they could to keep the union out. So not only has Unite won recognition for our members in Ryanair, the directly employed long-term workforce, but we have also signed a recognition agreement with CrewLink, the main agency that recruits for Ryanair. And we are moving on to the other agency, Workforce International, as well. So the next steps are critical. Our diverse membership is growing. Our reps are being elected, and a tribute to Sarah, Nick, and Laszlo. The first negotiating meetings are being arranged, and our joint campaigning on Ryanair with other unions across Europe and internationally, with the ITF and ETF, European and international transport workers, continues. Ryanair workers know that their union and our movement cares. They are not alone, and together we can make a difference. All workers need to know that this is possible. Congress, trade unions and the Labour Party civilised the last century. Now is the time to come together to confront and stop the dismantling of all our achievements. We can move forward again. And to Jet2, still operating the anti-union model in aviation, we say, you will not stop this tide of history. Thank you. Please support Congress.
Thank you, Unite. Valper, do you need your right to reply? No. Congress, I'm going to move us to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. Will all those against please show? Thank you. That is carried. We turn to section 3 of the General Council report, Respect and a Voice at Work. That's from page 32. I'm calling paragraphs 3.1, 3.3 and composite motion number 13, a new deal for workers. The General Council supports the composite motion. It's to be moved by the CWU, seconded by NEU, supported by PCS. I have GMB who've indicated to speak as well, so will you all come to the front? Thank you very much. CWU, the floor is yours.
Yeah, President, Congress, Dave Ward, Communications Union, to move Composite 13, which, following the successful 12th of May rally, instructs Francis, the General Council, to agree and publish the next steps plan in a new deal for workers. Something struck me about some of the debates that have been going on. Everyone's talking about a new mood. Everyone's talking about a new mood out there. This is the motion on the pad that connects those things and connects everything that we're talking about. Every delegate here agrees that today's world of work is the most pressurised and the least rewarding in our living memory. Your members, my members, your family, my family, they face a daily grind when they walk into work. And what employers say to them, and they're saying it to every single worker in this country, is how can I make you work faster every day? How can I make you work harder? And the killing point of it all is, and how can I make you do these things for less? The result is 150 years on, the very foundation of the British economy is austerity, is insecure work, and is millions of people living in in-work poverty. So let's face it, it's only going to get worse with the march of the fourth industrial revolution. And let's face it, for the vast majority of people in this country, particularly the younger generation, life chances are no longer about our arduous work. They're about what you was born with. And the most important question, and I'm going to make the case that it's more important for workers than Brexit, as important as that is what are we going to do about this? Well, the CWU's putting forward a 4-point plan. We've been going on about this, but we want you to really grab hold of this and let's take this forward. 1, agree a common bargaining agenda. It will send a powerful message. Make it sectorial bargaining across all employers to tackle insecure employment. Doesn't need to diminish the individual challenges that union faces. It's about connecting those in a common bargaining agenda. 2, let's end what the speaker from the NEU said, the question. Let's end the internal competition. Let's agree a new charter like Bridlington. Let's not talk about disputes anymore between us and a charter that resolves disputes. Let's talk about a charter that actually gets greater cooperation and builds some of the things, great things that some unions are doing across the whole movement to recruit and organise workers. 3, let's publish a manifesto that sets out what a new deal looks like. Labour have done it, the IER have done it, we can build on that, we can go further than that. Higher pay, shorter hours. Francis, you got great coverage this morning and credit to the TUC on a 4-day week. And you can tell that people are waiting to hear this debate. Pensions, better pensions for everybody. We can set out what those things are. But the key is, do all of that, but let's have some action. And what we're saying is deliverable action. We're not telling people here that you've got to go out and have a general strike. Some of us would love that, but we've got to build towards it. What we're saying is each union from a range of options that we can agree can take innovative action around June next year, a day when we all come together. Workers would get behind the trade union movement like they never have in the last 20 or 30 years. I guarantee you that if we put the effort into this collectively, we're too strong as a movement for this not to work. And I'm going to say to you, Congress, if you want to unite workers around Brexit, then start the fight here for a new deal for workers in the UK. If we want to see off, and we do, confront the right-wing politics that's coming at us head-on, then start the work now to get all workers behind a new deal. We've got an opportunity here like never before. It's not going to come round again. And we're saying today, this is the proposition, the only one that joins everything together in a simple and effective plan. Let's make sure that we reassert trade union values. Let's make sure we work on this. This is the most important thing that joins us all together, that really does mean that the sum of the whole is stronger than the sum of any of its parts. I move.
Thank you, CW. The NEU, please.
President Conference, Heather Mackenzie, the National Education Union, very proud to be seconding this motion in our 150th year. Lost my way. This is at the core of our trade union rights, and acting together will bring us stronger to ensure that this fourth industrial revolution sees workers of all ages, especially young workers and older workers, leading the fight for a voice, a loud, proud voice, for a social justice in all our workplaces, and collective bargaining for all. No more bright sides. We, the workers here today and the workers of the future, have the will to empower fellow unionists to lead in this time of political chaos, to bring employers, big and small, public and private, to positive creative work practices for all, not the few, to challenge inequality with our solidarity. As the supreme body of workers, we at the TUC need to welcome young and unorganised workers who have disproportionately been affected by unemployment, insecure and 0 hours contracts and platform work, to give them a route to manifest their outrage, as well as ours, at the unfairness of what will continue to be a bleak future with a new deal, without a new deal, where our solidarity will ensure that this new deal is a fair deal and that it's a bright future for all. A deal which will create for everybody, for workers, for employers, for everybody, a more productive and working future with equality at its centre. We need to work together and set out in these 4 points within all our sectors to form a dynamic plan. It's not going to happen overnight, but we've got the will to make it work, to make it a reality, to agree a strong bargaining agenda. We can and will substantially reform workplaces for the future, not only on pay, but on all aspects of working life. To deliver this, we must help create a legal framework for employment rights from day one of our young people's working lives, so they don't, as in teaching and all of your industries I'm sure, leave in droves due to heavy workloads and work practices and in other industries. We need to make sure that we're campaigning together with others for social justice within this, because the two are intrinsically linked. So, colleagues, it's with pride that I second this motion for our young workers and for our old workers everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, NEU. I call PCS.
President Conference, Fran Heathcote from PCS, moving Amendment 2 to Motion 69. In July of this year, civil servants voted for strike action with the highest yes vote and highest turnout that we have ever achieved. We balloted 140,000 members in 120 civil service employers and 3,000 workplaces. Our turnout was 41.6%, the highest turnout in a civil service-wide ballot we have ever achieved, and 18% higher than our last civil service ballot. But it fell short of the 50% turnout threshold, which has been implemented as a consequence of the passing of the 2016 Trade Union Act. We are learning lessons from that ballot, the first of which is that it is not impossible to achieve our 50% turnout. We have committed to build our organisation in every workplace so that we can win a ballot on pay in the civil service. One lesson we have learned is that you have to commit early to a timetable. So we are preparing now for a civil service strike ballot over pay for spring 2019. However, we also strongly believe that the 50% turnout threshold is undemocratic. This threshold does not apply to any political election or for shareholder votes. In fact, the 50% threshold was not reached for the London Mayor election, the European parliamentary elections, or for most of the government elections, local government elections. Requiring a threshold for union ballots effectively counts non-votes and no votes. In our experience, this was not the reason for non-voting. During the ballot, we contacted thousands of members by phone, and the vast majority were in favour of our campaign. The main reason for not voting was a lost or not received ballot paper. However, not only does the law require a 50% threshold, but the law requires unions to undertake ballots only by post. According to the census, over 10% of the UK population changes addresses every year. This means that a proportion of addresses will become out of date every year. The importance of mail as a form of communication has fallen. Personal mail has been replaced by email and other electronic forms of communication. Over 60% of all mail is now bulk mail. During the passage of the Trade Union Act 2016, the government agreed to a review of the use of electronic balloting in trade union ballots for industrial action. On the 1st of March 17, when the government introduced the ballot threshold, it also announced that Sir Ken Knight would lead a review into the use of electronic balloting. This review reported on the 18th of December 2017 and recommended that electronic balloting pilots should take place. The government has taken no further action in relation to these recommendations. The PCS experience shows that the use of electronic balloting can be effective in increasing turnouts. In October 17, we conducted a consultative ballot which had a turnout of 49%. In this ballot, 24% of members voted by post and 24% online. Given we managed to increase postal voting to 41.6%, we are convinced that if online voting had been available, the turnout would have been above the 50% threshold. We are now exploring a legal challenge which will be made to the current legislation on the basis of the combination of the threshold of the requirement for postal voting places unlawful restrictions on the right to freedom of association. Please support our amendment and support the campaign to change this undemocratic anti-union legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. CW, do you need your right of reply? Oh, is it GB? I do apologise, GB.
President, Congress, Dave Flanagan, proudly speaking in support of this composite on behalf of the GMB. Our members are only too aware of how uneven the playing field is between workers and bosses. It is too easy for employers to undermine trade unions and keep us away from the people we seek to represent and serve. At GMB, we use a wide range of methods to reach out and engage workers in the most hostile environments. Through training and education, getting our message out on the transport they use, a presence outside the places of work, using technology such as digital media. We align with local community groups and other organisations who campaign for social justice in our communities. All this in addition to our hard-working, dedicated members who, in the workplace, put their head above the parapet by speaking out, defending and fighting for injustice wherever it may occur. And most importantly, offer a listening ear and a wing to support members and have those vital conversations which make such a difference. Congress, we should not be afraid to use the law, as limited as it can be, to improve conditions. GMB is proud of every single victory that we've had in the name of our members, particularly most recently, the fight we took and won on behalf of the Uber drivers and Hermes couriers. Thank you. Our main goal, however, is to win in the workplaces. We cannot and will not leave the fate of our members in the hands of a judge. That is why we need a new deal for workers. There are some who blame the trade unions for the challenging environment we operate in without recognising the deck of cards stacked heavily in the favour of the employer, something that is not the case in other countries. This motion gets the balance right. It prepares the ground for a radical government under Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and the laws they will introduce to give us a fighting chance. It will ensure that we campaign for that change now, not just at the next general election. Congress, this motion will ensure we, as a TUC, get our own house in order. Recruiting and organising in the face of a hostile employer is challenging and resource intensive. Let's be clear, no trade union affiliated to the TUC should indulge in the antics we have witnessed in recent years. It brings the movement into disrepute and, most importantly, sells out the workers. The stakes for working people in the UK could not be higher. The consequences are clear to see today. The picture for many working people today across the country is one of desperation and frustration. Working people experience the indignity of relying on food banks. Working people experience the indignity of taking crisis loans. Working people experience the indignity of escalating debt. And working people experience the indignity of trying to get from one end of the month to the other to survive. All working people unable to function in society adequately simply because the terms and conditions of their employment and the recompense are such that it doesn't allow it. What a damning indictment of this government that working people are experiencing in-work poverty at such huge levels. We know that the systematic attacks on the trade union movement and the attack on the dignity of workers since Thatcher has meant more for the bosses, the spivs and the speculators, and less for the real wealth creators, working people, our members, struggling and suffering in the name of poverty over profit over necessity. They deserve better. Congress, please support.
Thank you, GMB. CW, do you need your right to reply? No? I'm going to move us to the vote. All those in favour of composite motion 13, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. Thank you. That's carried. I call paragraph 3(4) and motion 70, the collective voice. General Council support. Moved by Prospect, seconded by Astor. I have other speakers, Community, CW, Nautilus and Unite. Can you come to the front? I give you warning now. I'm running against the clock here a bit, so I may not be able to call all of you, but if you're all here, we'll do our best. Thank you. Prospect, the floor is yours.
President Congress, Mike Clancy, General Secretary Prospect, moving motion 70. Now, if there's one subject that unifies all strands of trade union opinion, it's the urgent need for a renaissance of collective voice and collective bargaining. And there's no more pressing issue for our political influencing strategies than the creation and delivery of public policy that turns the tide of decline in voice. Because I suggest, Congress, that we will not do this by organising alone, particularly in the private sector, which is our crucial target area. It's vitally important that we reorganise the private sector to protect what we have left in terms of bargaining and voice in the public sector. Now, whilst that objective unifies us, we do need to recognise that there are different strands of opinion in relation to how we go about it. Sectoral bargaining will undoubtedly be a cornerstone of a new system, but we should be careful what we wish for if we don't address workplace, company or enterprise bargaining. How we build representative workspace, and I use that term deliberately because of the various forms in which work now comes, is vitally important. Beware the consequences of sectoral bargaining that doesn't of itself animate the decision to join in the workspaces covered. And after all, what we are talking about is not just a renaissance of collective voice, but of collective trade union membership. And what about the bosses? Now, the power relationships in this economy need urgent rebalancing to give voice. But not all employers are bad. Some employers, as we've heard throughout Congress already, and we will do through the rest of our time here, need the application of sword of justice trade unionism. But the experience of work at many people that we seek to organise is not that their employer is bad, is not that their experience at work is bad. So how do we organise in those circumstances? How do we show the worth of trade unionism, and how do we show the value of collective voice? In short, we need to think about the other side of the table as much as our side of the table, whether that be at a sectoral level or an enterprise level. And like it or not, if we're going to win this argument, vital that it is, for a renaissance of collective voice, we need to take some employers with us on that journey. Now, we also need to think about our language. I don't know about you, but not every social context I'm in are people clamouring and talking about collective bargaining and collective voice. And let's face it, we use the word voice because collective bargaining and a lot of our language is a mystery to the people that we're actually trying to help. So we need to think very carefully about the contemporary expression of our aspirations on behalf of people in these workspaces. We need to recognise also that as you look out, particularly on the private sector, but also the public sector, there is a myriad forms of work organisation, myriad forms of corporate structure. There are various forms of pay systems. In the private sector, 85% of people are not getting any say on their terms and conditions, and systems have grown up that we'll have to adapt our messaging to get the point over that collective bargaining is not just about the lowest common denominator. Collective bargaining is about norms, it's about fairness, it's about redistribution, it's about prosperity, it's about productivity, and it's about aspiration. Critically, we need to make sure that our language is not vulnerable to lampooning and defeat. There is no higher mission than that we face in relation to collective voice. Now, we have a broken economic model, something else we can all agree on. Every year there is outrage about executive pay and the multiple over the median. Every year that will continue to happen unless we address the absence of collective voice in this economy. It is clear that capitalism does not share without the prompt of trade union voice and without the prompt of trade union action. We will continue to face equal pay and gender pay gap scandals unless people are given collective voice. And if we exit the European Union, this economy is uniquely vulnerable without the renaissance of collective bargaining. So, Congress, we all can unify around the objective of a renaissance and a move forward in terms of collective voice. Let's accept we have different opinions of doing it. Let's take our allies with us, and let's take some people who wouldn't normally be those necessarily automatically associated with our aspirations with us also. I move motion 70.
Thank you, Prospect Astor. Can I then have Community and CWU ready to speak?
President Congress, Paddy Lillis, Usdo seconding the motion on collective voice. Colleagues, a strong collective voice enables workers to confidently engage with their employer on workplace issues. And we have seen that the most effective form of collective voice is delivered through an agreement with an independent trade union. Congress, as we know, workers covered by a trade union agreement on average receive higher pay, more holidays, and generally more favourable terms and conditions. Yet it is concerning that the number of workers covered by collective agreements continues to dwindle. The proportion of employees covered by collective bargaining has fallen by 2/3 in the last 40 years. Colleagues, the resultant imbalance of power has given rise to the problems such as 0 hours contracts, bogus self-employment, and no voice for the workforce in the business. We need a government that will encourage the widespread adoption of collective bargaining to give workers access to better terms and conditions. More than this, increased levels of collective bargaining has also been shown to improve productivity across a range of industries. USDO agrees that collective voice and the future of collective bargaining should be a key part of the TUC's work on the future of unions. As well as addressing policymakers, we also need to make a clear case to potential union members. In the media, we hear stories about the decline of trade unions and about how young workers are not interested in trade unions or don't see the value of union membership. The experience of my union, USDO, is that this simply isn't the case. We currently have over 80,000 workers under the age of 27 in membership, and we continually recruit young people in retail, distribution, call centres, food production sites. And there are many strategies to successfully recruit young people, but we should not forget that the simplest, ensuring that all young people are spoken to and asked to join, may often be the most effective. The trade union movement needs to work hard to ensure that organising workers and a collective voice remains relevant and powerful in the 21st century economy. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, USDO. Community. Do I have community here? Thank you. It's okay. And CWU next, and Nautilus to follow.
President, Congress, Peter Hobson, Community, speaking in support of Motion 70. Congress, we're not only here to determine the priorities for our movement for the year ahead, we're here to celebrate what we have achieved over the past 150 years. Those achievements would have been possible without collective bargaining. That is what our unions were formed for, to give working people a voice, to give workers power, and to secure our fair share in recognition and reward for what we do. The founding principles of our movement are still important today, but we need to apply them in a different world of work, one that is changing faster than ever before. We need to demonstrate the difference that trade unions can make. Everyone here knows the difference. I know my pay, terms and conditions are what they are thanks to over 100 years of negotiation. Every year, trying to secure a little more for our members. We don't always succeed, but we never give up. There will always be reasons for us to protest, but we must also persuade. The facts and figures prove unions make a positive difference to productivity, to income equality, and the economy in general. But we still need to make our case, and we must all be concerned that millions of workers do not benefit from trade union negotiation. Millions don't know what some of the basic rights people enjoy are thanks to the efforts of the trade unionists over the past 150 years. Now we need to look to the future, recognise that more and more people work in different ways. That's why Community is trying to reach out to self-employed workers and our partners in IndieCube. That's why we're working with a new tech company called Labour Exchange, which is trying to disrupt the worst abuses of a gig economy. That's why we're constantly asking what more we can do to make sure our collective voice makes a difference. For only by bringing more people into our movement, we will ensure that things improve for working people for the next 150 years. Please support.
Thank you. CWU, to be followed by Nautilus and Unite.
Congress, Kate Hudson on behalf of the Communication Workers Union supporting Motion 70. Congress, the world of work is changing before our very eyes. Many of us will have spent a career in a single organisation, perhaps even in a single role. I myself have been a proud postwoman for 22 years, but the younger generation walking into a job today and deeming it as a job for life is a rarity. Today's entrants entering the world of work may switch jobs a number of times, adapting their skills as the market changes and as opportunities arise. 1 in 9 workers are in insecure work, and younger workers who are in first-time employment may not know any different when it comes to what is or isn't acceptable in the workplace. Most are scared to speak out and move on to another job. But as we are all aware, this does not fix the problem. On top of this, automation and the gig economy have a tendency to pit worker against worker and undermine pay terms and conditions. These challenges cannot be overcome by individuals, but rather necessitate a collective voice. We must equip young people with a better understanding of trade unions and our role in the workplace. An 18-year-old entering the labour market for the first time may not understand that a union can bargain for you, help defend your pension and provide a safeguard against bullying, harassment and unsafe working conditions. Equipping them with this knowledge while they're in education is vital, not only to ensure they have the best start to their working life, but also to sustain our movement. How many young people enter the world and work and don't ask about terms and conditions? How many don't understand that they have the right to representation? We must showcase the vitality and value of union membership today and reach out to young people, but to do this, we may need to change the way we operate. The traditional organisational model built up over decades and generations is still relevant in many areas, but it must be complemented with a more nimble, flexible approach to recruitment if we are to adapt to the new world of work. Equally, we must work together as trade unions and reflect on how young workers can maintain trade union membership even as they cycle through a variety of roles and organisations. Congress, we have to get this right. Too many young workers are being exploited and are working in fear of speaking out. We all know in this room the power of a union. Let's make sure all workers know that too. Thank you.
Thank you, CW. I call Nautilus.
President, Congress, Danny McGowan, Nautilus International, speaking in support of Motion 70. Nautilus believes that this motion is of critical importance for all of us, now and in the future. In our industry, the maritime industry, training is often the first victim of cost-cutting programs. And so we not only need to sort our recruitment policies out, but also fight to defend investment in training in the first place. There's no better way to convince young workers of the case for collectivism than by demonstrating its successes. And our union has not only successfully fought off a long-term decline in training, but also managed this year to secure a doubling in the government funding to support maritime training. We're engaged right at the grassroots in recruiting members at colleges, taking up their problems as students and holding surgeries and surveys to find out what they want and what they need. We work in partnership with good companies and at national and international level to help shape the training courses that our young members follow. And we've created a special, growing and flourishing forum in which they can meet and share their views and experiences and also feed their ideas into the union. Now, none of this is rocket science, and I know it's what many of your unions are doing as well. But you can't get a more globalized and gig-type employment than in the shipping industry. And our organising model means that we've continued to recruit young members at a rate that many other unions would envy. In short, the economy may not be delivering for young workers, but unions need to deliver for them and to show that they're delivering. Please support this motion.
Yes, I call Unite.
MAFCON, Unite, speaking in support of Motion 70. Congress, the reduction of collective bargaining in recent years, along with the silencing of the voice of workers, is the crisis which defines our times. The dismantling of collective bargaining through the decline of traditional work and the political ideology of recent governments is the root cause of inequality unseen since the 70s. Congress, whilst collective bargaining is central to the issues we face in our workplaces every single day, it raises a more fundamental issue. It's about the balance of power in the workplace and in society. Ultimately, every reform extracted from government, every single penny conceded by an employer is due to our bargaining power. Conference, this is an urgent issue. The fall in UK collective bargaining coverage is amongst the fastest decline in the developed world. No sector has been exempt. Manufacturing was once a fortress of collective bargaining. However, government data reveals that last year only 21.8% of manufacturing workers had their pay determined by collective agreements. In my company, Rolls-Royce, a large manufacturing organisation, we arrest that decline by organising in white-collar staff, in apprentices, and even in agency workers. As a result, we're able to secure infrastructure investment, no redundancy clauses, and improvements to final salary pensions against recent trends. But we cannot reverse the decline in collective bargaining by organising alone. We need collective bargaining legislation, which throws out the most restrictive anti-trade union laws in Western Europe. We need to re-establish sectorial bargaining, backed by the right to access trade unions in every workplace. The law must become an aid to organising, not a barrier. Congress, on behalf of my union, please support the motion.
Thank you, Unite Prospect. Do you need your right for reply? No. I therefore call the vote. Will all those in favour of motion 70 please show? Thank you. Will all those against please show? That's carried. Delegates, before I ask the General Secretary to give her address to Congress, let's have a look back at the year we've had. Thank you. Francis, I'm delighted to ask you to address Congress. Congress, welcome our General Secretary.
Thank you very much to our fantastic President. Thank you, Sally. I'm formally moving the General Council statement on collective bargaining, and my thanks to you, delegates, to the General Council and to all our unions. Now, as we know from Sally's speech 150 years ago, unions met in a small room in the Mechanics Institute. And here we are, we're back in Manchester, still fighting for working people with the same belief we're stronger together and that same spirit of hope and determination. Let's also be proud of our contribution to other great causes that we're celebrating. 70 years of our wonderful NHS. "90 years since all women got the right to vote. And 100 years since the birth of Nelson Mandela. Now, he led people on that long road to freedom. And I'm proud, we should all be proud, that the global trade union movement, born in Manchester, backed him every step of the way. Now, this seems to be the year of anniversaries because, of course, 30 years ago, Jacques Delors gave his famous address to our Congress. 1988, the year Kylie Minogue topped the charts with her song, "I Should Be So Lucky." Lucky, lucky, lucky. Funnily enough, we weren't feeling it. Then, as now, we were under a Tory government and the Prime Minister was rolling out the red carpet for another American president. You remember him well, Ronald Reagan. The original warmongering, anti-trade union, B-list celebrity president. But Jacques Delors offered us something different. He spoke about peace in Europe and plans to boost trade. That mattered for jobs. And he encouraged us to become architects in a new plan for better working lives. So over time, alongside our friends in Europe, we won paid leave for working parents, stronger equal pay rights for women, pensions for part-timers, and at long last, one of the first ever goals of our movement, paid holidays for everyone. Now, countries don't have to belong to the European Union to be in the single market. But if they want to trade inside the market, every worker must get these rights. They are the rock that national laws and union agreements are built on. But now we face Brexit in exactly 200 days. This country needs a deal that works for working people. But frankly, there's no sign of that. As they stand, the Prime Minister's Chequers proposals won't get past Brussels or Westminster. And if she really believes that an agreement with the EU can be signed and delivered by November, then she's either fooling herself or she's trying to fool the British people. The risk of crashing out is real. Now, Theresa May says, and I quote her, "No deal wouldn't be the end of the world." Now, I think most people would like the bar set a little higher than that. And frankly, it's cold comfort for the millions of people whose jobs are on the line. Now, of course, for wealthy Tory MPs like, I don't know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, no deal is the Holy Grail. On Planet Mogg, 50 years of hardship is a small price to pay. But then again, he won't be paying it. So the TUC is clear. We want a Brexit deal that protects working people, not just the well-to-do in the posh parts of Surrey, and not just the City of London or big business either, but a deal for the people who are the backbone of this country. All along, we've said that we're open to any deal that protects workers' jobs and rights and peace in Northern Ireland. That's what most people want. Decent livelihoods, dignity at work, the kind of country where their children get a better life than they did. And that's what we want too. But the stark reality is this. If we crash out, or if we end up with one of those CETA-style deals, trade barriers will go up. That means it's more expensive to make things here. Companies move factories abroad, and investors look elsewhere. Bang go good jobs, up go prices, and Dover becomes one big lorry park. So this is what needs to happen next. The PM needs to be straight with us about how her deal would hit jobs. And she needs to serve notice that we need an extension to Article 50, so instead we can negotiate the deal that workers need. This isn't about delaying Brexit. It's about leaving the EU on the right terms, where jobs and rights come first. And if she won't do it, or if her party won't let her, well, then I'm serving notice on the Prime Minister. If you come back with a deal that doesn't put workers first, and if you won't call a general election, then I'm warning you, we'll throw our full weight behind a campaign and demand that the terms of the deal are put to a popular vote. After all, we're the movement that fought for the vote for working class people. And we know that democracy belongs to all of us. And when it comes to our future, one way or another, people must have a say. Because we've had 10 long years of wage freezes, cuts and austerity, and the stakes are very high. Now, the poet, as people will know, my favourite poet, Seamus Heaney, wrote that when human beings suffer, they get hurt and they get hard. That's what the far right want to exploit, stirring up division, spreading hate. Some politicians have warned of violence on the streets. Well, I've got news for them. It's already happening. Since the referendum 2 years ago, there's been a shocking rise in attacks by far-right thugs against Muslims and Jewish people, against gay and disabled people, and against migrant workers too. Look at Tommy Robinson's gang, recruiting on the terraces, rampaging through our streets, targeting trade unionists. And this isn't the 1930s or the 1970s. This time, they're not just organising on the streets, they're mobilising on Facebook and WhatsApp, aided and abetted by Russian hackers, paid for by American billionaires. And when neo-fascists threaten public order and peace, we don't retreat. We don't let them intimidate us. Our response must be more democracy, not less. And I want to say this. Any self-serving politician who flirts with the far right is playing with fire. Let me be clear. A woman who wears a niqab or a burqa is still our sister. And we defend the right of Muslim women and all women to wear whatever they want. So I want to say this to Boris Johnson. We see you. We know what you're about. We know exactly what buttons you're pushing. But our movement will always call out those who dog whistle racism. So Boris Johnson, shame on you. And delegates, here's another prejudice that needs nailing, which I'm fed up about. From the far-right rich men, they claim to champion the interests of blue-collar workers, but they don't. It may suit them to try and stereotype everyone who's white and working class as a racist, but they're wrong. The great majority are decent men and women. Look at the trade union movement. Whatever our nationality, race or religion, we stand together as workers. And we will keep speaking up for common decency. Because this movement's mission is to unite working people. And we can stop the far right in its tracks. So here's what we'll do. First, we'll mobilise our members. Trade unions bring people together. We build friendships and communities. There are nearly 6 million of us, and our members are the most powerful force we have. Now, we're not in denial. We know we've got work to do on attitudes about anti-Semitism, immigration, Islam. So first, we will get behind our workplace reps so they feel confident to counter far-right views and build a bulwark against them. Second, we need Parliament to wake up and take urgent action. And that means new rules to take big overseas money out of our politics, not just at election time, but for good. It means tough new duties on social media giants to stop the spread of hate. And yes, it must mean a new deal for working people too. Because it's true, our hospitals are understaffed and waiting lists are too long. It's true that school staff are overworked and classes are too big. And it's true that too often our kids can't find an affordable home or a decently paid, steady job. But we don't blame Poles or Romanians, we don't blame Muslims, and we don't blame migrants. We blame a Tory government that is bankrupting public services. We blame tax-dodging transnational companies too greedy to pay their fair share. And we blame bad bosses always on the lookout for cheap labour, undercutting wages and driving decent employers out of business. So today, let's pledge that we'll organise working people into movements in towns across the country. And we'll work with unions in Europe and internationally too, to demand decent jobs, homes and public services, and stop racist scapegoating once and for all. And wherever the far-right marches or tries to attack mosques or synagogues, the trade union movement will be there, defending our communities, standing firm. Let's send the message, delegates. Let's send that message. They will not pass. But all the while, we will keep our eyes on the future and tackle the root causes of hate and win that better life that working people deserve. Right now, we're living through a time of rapid industrial disruption. Capital is grabbing more and more of the gains, and labour is shortchanged. But as new tech grows, everyone should get richer. Productivity gains from artificial intelligence alone could be worth £200 billion. If even half of those promised gains are true, then we can afford to make it happen. Now, as ever, we demand fair shares. That means higher wages, less time at work, more time with our loved ones. Now, in the 19th century, unions campaigned for an 8-hour day. In the 20th century, we won the right to a 2-day weekend and paid holidays. So for the 21st century, let's lift our ambition again. I believe that in this century, we can win a 4-day working week with decent pay for everyone. Let's take back control of our working time, ban 0 hours, win two-way flexibility, and end exploitation once and for all. Because it's time to share the wealth and stop the greed. Take Jeff Bezos. Now, he runs Amazon, now a $1 trillion company. He's the richest man in the world. He's racking up the billions, but his workers are collapsing on the job. Ambulances called because staff are exhausted. Workers afraid to go sick in case they get disciplined. Camping out because pay won't stretch to cover the cost of transport. Britain today. You bet we need strong unions, and we want the right to go into every workplace, starting with those warehouses. You know, Amazon's company motto, I looked this one up, Amazon's company motto is work hard, have fun, make history. Well, let me say to Amazon and all those other companies that exploit workers, that's exactly what our union organisers intend to do. Brothers and sisters, we're at a crossroads, and the political choices that we make now will determine our future. Used for good, technology can protect the planet from climate change, help advances in healthcare, make working lives richer and better. But we know there are risks too. No one needs to tell this movement what happens when a company goes bust overnight, when there's no help for industries to upgrade or for workers to retrain. We know how much that hurts people. People used to respect and a decent standard of living, treated like nobodies, abandoned, on the scrap heap. And we can't let bosses make working life worse, tracking and timing workers' every move, snooping on what staff say in their own time on Facebook and Instagram, sweating them with impossible targets set by computer. But trade unionists are optimists. We've won this battle before, and we can do it again. Win a share of the wealth, stop Big Brother surveillance, and negotiate new technology agreements so people can move smoothly into the jobs of the future. Because if we want a more equal Britain, collective bargaining is a big part of the solution. Let's agree that every worker should have the right to a collective voice. Let's have an obligation on employers to bargain with us in good faith. And let's deliver a tech revolution that benefits the whole country. But we need a government that wants to work with us, not one obsessed with its own party power games, when they should be focused on the real lives of the people that they're supposed to serve. Franklin D. Roosevelt, he was the architect of the original New Deal. He took over as American president years into the Great Depression. And he spoke of the despair when a nation looks to government, but the government looks away. Well, today in Britain, we have exactly such a hear nothing, see nothing, do nothing government. Theresa May stood on the steps of Downing Street, promising to help the just about managing. Remember that? But 2 years later, nothing. Nothing to stop universal credit cuts, nothing to get wages rising, nothing on 0 hours contracts, nothing on building council homes, and nothing for the Windrush generation. What's this government's plan to help working people? Absolutely nothing. Now, I believe it's time for change. We need a better government than this one. Working people deserve a better government than this one. So I want to end with this message to the Prime Minister. If you can't deliver a Brexit that protects jobs and rights, if you can't invest in our NHS, our schools and our public services, if you won't put the railways, water, Royal Mail back into public hands where they belong, if you won't build a country where we can live in peace with our neighbours and where right across the nation people get fair shares, if you won't give us the New Deal that working people demand, Mrs. May, stand down. Stand down, Theresa, and take your do-nothing government with you. Give us a general election, and we will do everything in our power to elect a new Prime Minister and a new government that will. Thank you, delegates. Happy 150th. Stay strong. Here's to the next 150.
Francis, thank you. Congress, at the beginning of that fantastic speech, Francis did actually formally move the General Council statement on collective bargaining. I know how to bring us back to the exciting things, and I have to ask Congress to agree that. So, the General Council statement on collective bargaining, can I please see those all in favour? Thank you. All those against, please show. Thank you. I call paragraph 6.5. Delegates, we return to section 3 of the General Council report, Respect and a Voice at Work. The section on health, safety and regulation, that's from page 42. I call motion 24, bullying and harassment. The General Council support the motion. It's moved by the FDA, seconded by the College of Podiatry. I don't have any other indicated speakers. So can we start then, please? The FDA. Thank you.
Good morning. Fiona Eadie, moving this motion on behalf of the FDA. When the Westminster harassment scandal broke last autumn, it became clear that the process for dealing with bullying and harassment and sexual harassment complaints against ministers and MPs was woefully inadequate. This was something that the FDA had warned about time and time again. As we all know, this type of abuse is fundamentally an abuse of power. When the bully or harasser is a politician, a minister in government, or an MP in Parliament, there is an even greater exploitation of power. So last autumn, FDA carried out a survey of our members about their experiences of bullying and harassment in their workplace. The findings were shocking, but sadly not surprising. 58% of them reported being bullied at work, but only 16% reported that they had confidence in the process for dealing with bullying and harassment in their workplaces. It is clear from FDA's survey that the policies for dealing with bullying and harassment in the civil service are not fit for purpose. Following this survey evidence, the civil service initiated a review of bullying and harassment to investigate how these cases are dealt with and what policies and practices there are in individual departments. The FDA has been working hard to influence the development of the recommendations for this work. We have pushed for issues like confidentiality, support and timely information for those involved in the policies. And there should be no repercussions for those raising a complaint. However, this review does not cover bullying and harassment complaints against ministers. That has been covered in a separate review into ministerial and special advisor codes of conduct. It is probably no surprise to say that the progress on that review has been considerably slower. At the moment, complaints against ministers at Westminster end up with the Prime Minister. We know that this ultimately means that the internal politics, party politics, will always be the deciding factor about whether and how complaints against particular individuals are dealt with. What hope do individuals have who try to make a complaint about bullying and harassment against a minister that it will be taken seriously and investigated fairly? There must be an independent process for dealing with complaints so that staff are not caught up in the political crossfire. We've seen in the last few weeks with stories about complaints made against Alex Salmond that even in the Scottish Government, where there is an independent process for dealing with complaints, that party politics still comes into play and politicians will always rally to protect their allies under fire. This has resulted in the civil servant tasked with carrying out that investigation coming under sustained personal attack by the allies of Mr. Salmond for doing her job. But at least the Scottish Government does have an independent policy, and the investigation is taking place. They have led the way in developing an independent process, and it is time that the UK Government stop dragging their heels and do the same. We know this won't be easy. For years, we've tried to get a fully independent process for dealing with complaints against MPs in the House of Commons. Disappointingly, in the new policy, MPs still chose to protect themselves and to vote for a woefully inadequate policy. But FDA will not stop working to get a fully independent process in place. I would like to applaud all the women and men who have bravely come forward to tell their stories. This publicly shone a light on bullying, harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace. This took incredible courage, and it is important that we don't move on from this moment without listening and taking them seriously. Whether the harassment takes place in Hollywood or Holyrood, it can never be tolerated. Fundamentally, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect at work. Now is the time for us to say bullying, harassment and sexual harassment has no place in any workplace, especially in the heart of government. Congress, time is up.
Thank you. I call the College of Podiatry.
President Congress, Martin Furlong, College of Podiatry, speaking in favour of motion 24. And if you're wondering who College of Podiatry are, we were until recently known as the Society of Chiropodists and Podiatrists. Congress, in 2017, the NHS staff survey results showed that bullying and harassment was an extensive problem in the health sector. 1 in 4 of all NHS staff reported that they had experienced bullying in some way. 30% of all NHS staff said they had suffered psychological stress due to bullying behaviours. A report in 2013 called Bullying, the Silent Epidemic in the NHS reported that a quarter of staff in the NHS felt that they were bullied. The reported rate of bullying had doubled in the 4 years previously. Sir Ian Kennedy, in his report into the Care at the Heart of England NHS Trust, said bullying was one of the biggest untalked about problems in the delivery of good care to patients. In other words, bullying of staff in the NHS leads to bad outcomes for patients. Congress, something had to change, not just for the good of our members, but for the good of the people that the staff are there to care for. In December 2016, the then Department of Health Minister asked the Social Partnership Forum in the NHS to develop a plan to tackle bullying in the NHS. And on the 7th of December 2016, the Tackling Bullying Call to Action was launched. Leaders across the NHS are committed to making a difference by promoting supportive cultures where staff can flourish and problem behaviours such as bullying are tackled. Whilst the problem of bullying and harassment within the NHS has not been eradicated, the culture is changing to one where staff can feel safe to go to work, where bullying cultures are called out and challenged, not just accepted. But there is more work to do. And in the NHS, that work that has been achieved has only been made possible by working with the trade unions and with our reps in the workplaces. Congress, we would like the good work undertaken in this way to be recognised and learnt across all work sectors so that no member of staff should go to work and feel frightened and intimidated. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much. Do you need your right to reply? FJ, no. I therefore move to the vote on motion 24. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. And all those against please show. That motion is carried. Thank you. I call motion 25, Regulation Matters. The General Counsel support the motion. It's moved by Prospect, seconded by Usdaw. I have other speakers notified from PCS and CWU. Could you all come down to the front, please? The floor is yours.
Thank you, President. Congress. Neil Hope Collins, Prospect. Regulation matters. Regulation protects. It protects the environment, it protects people, it protects good jobs, it protects our members and their future. Over the past few years, however, and the past few governments, the myth that regulation is a burden has grown up.
There's a myth that regulation stifles, regulation inhibits. Congress, the only people that are inhibited by regulation are those who wish to bully and exploit our members. The result of this myth has been greater scrutiny and challenge of regulation itself. That scrutiny is biased from the outset. It's things like the Regulatory Impact Assessment, a wonderful piece of legislation that's supposed to be a cost-benefit analysis of regulation, something that on the face of it doesn't sound too unreasonable. However, it is skewed and biased from the outset because that process only considers the costs. It's a cost-benefit analysis with no consideration of the benefits. It explicitly excludes consideration of the benefits. It explicitly excludes any consideration of what happens if we don't regulate, the costs of not protecting people and the environment. The other tool that the myth perpetrators have is the business impact target, an arbitrary number plucked from the air to make a conference soundbite. Cutting regulations will save business. Let's think of a nice round number, £10,000 million by 2020. That is the figure that government has put on what regulation will cost and what they will save. But again, the only thing it considers is what is spent by business in compliance. No consideration of the benefits for our members, no consideration of the benefits for the environment, no consideration of what happens if you don't protect. The target puts pressure on legislators and on the regulators, and so far that business impact target only applies to a small part of the regulatory framework. 200 days' time, all the regulations that emanate from EU directives will suddenly come into scope, and that pressure will be felt by all of our members all the time across the whole of their lives. So the myth has increased the scrutiny on regulations. It has increased the scrutiny on the regulators. It has increased the scrutiny on the individual inspectors, on their pay and the conditions. But let's face it, this government has found the most effective way of deregulating. You simply cut the funding. You starve the regulators of their funding, of their resources. You cut the pay and conditions until the jobs are not competitive and inspectors are walking out of the door faster than the regulators can recruit them. The regulators nowadays are in terminal decline. Unless we do something, they have won. This reduced capacity reduces protection. We have to do something, Congress. The regulatory system is broken. It's broken because regulation has been separated for industrial strategy. Sorry, what am I thinking? This government, industrial strategy? Congress, we need to put good regulation at the heart of our industrial strategy. We need properly funded, properly paid regulators who will do that job of protection for our members. I've just got a little time to speak to the amendment which was proposed and accepted and really welcome, because it speaks to the safety net that we, the trade unions, provide for our members. But Congress, we can only provide that safety net where we have members and where we have collective bargaining. We need to extend that safety net to the 85% of workers in the private sector who are not covered by collective bargaining. But to paraphrase Joe Hill, let's not mourn our lack of density in those areas. Congress, let us get out there and organise.
Respect, I call Usdell.
President, Congress, Paddy Lillis, Usdaw, seconding the motion, regulations matter. Congress, regulations are necessary to achieve social, environmental and workplace minimum standards that would otherwise not be achieved through the market. In fact, many regulations exist because industries have consistently failed to regulate themselves. The Tories have never made a secret that they were aiming for a bonfire of regulations to get rid of what they consider to be unnecessary bureaucracy. Thousands of pieces of regulations have been scrapped by the Tories since the launch of the Cutting Red Tape Challenge in 2011. Employment regulations have been merged, reduced and scrapped. Fire regulations have been slushed, and Grenfell Tower illustrates all too vividly what getting rid of red tape really looks like in real life. Then the government's proposed civil liabilities bill sets out to increase the small claims limit for personal injuries cases. The government tries to justify this bill with a lot of talk about fraudulent whiplash cases, but this talk about whiplash claims is just a smokescreen. The Conservatives, in fact, want to take away the right to free legal advice for hundreds of thousands of people injured at work or on the roads every year. Around 40% of personal injury cases are below the proposed £5,000 limit for road traffic accident claims and £2,000 limit for other personal injury cases. The bill, if passed, will mean that thousands of injured workers will no longer receive the necessary legal advice in often complex claims against their employer. Reducing the ability of workers to take legal action over injuries at work will inevitably lead to a reduction in health and safety standards in the workplace. And we will see weaker health and safety in the workplace, combined with workers not being able to take legal action over injuries at work. Congress, the proposed reforms are unfair, unnecessary, and an assault on workers' access to justice. As a trade union voice for workers, we must campaign loudly and effectively to stop this attack on access to justice for injured workers. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Asdor. I call PCS to be followed by CWU. Thank you.
Mark Emerson, speaking on behalf of PCS, asking you to support this motion. Congress is justified in its concerns about the ability of regulatory bodies to be able to carry out their functions. Continued attacks on public sector funding is having a detrimental impact on regulatory agencies like the Health and Safety Executive, Environment Agency and others whose funding has been cut to the point that it's reaching breaking point. And the impact of Brexit on bodies like HSE cannot be underestimated. For example, EU funding on the chemicals regulation is under threat, and the HSE is having to divert millions of pounds of contingency plans for whatever kind of deal we end up. Successive annual departmental spending rounds, or should that be savings rounds, mean that the HSE have so far saved 20 million to meet the reduction imposed on the 2015 Comprehensive Spending Review, bringing its total expenditure for 2017-18 down to 228 million. There are yet more savings to be achieved this year, and who knows what bad news is coming next month in the autumn statement. The HSE has not been able to achieve its increase in commercial revenue that it's planned for to make up for cuts in taxpayer funding. PCS members in HSE face further hardship as the HSE reviews the way it operates. Seeking further job cuts, there are 80 more posts expected to be lost by 2020. This is on top of the 49 posts that went in voluntary exit schemes last year. Staffing in HSE has seen a steady decline. In 2008, HSE staffing was at 3,270. In 2018, it's gone down to 2,637 full-time equivalent. That's just under 20% cut in 10 years. We need to wake up and realise that investment in regulators actually saves money. In 2016-17, 31.2 million working days were lost to work-related ill health. It's estimated that the actual cost to work-related injury and new ill health cases in 2015-16 was £14.9 billion. Surely it makes more sense to reduce the financial impact of work-related injury and ill health by tackling the cause, and in turn has an impact on lives of our members, their families, who are safer, healthier and happier as a result. Please support the motion.
Thank you. I call CW 3.
Maria Exel, CW, supporting motion 25. Congress, regulation does matter. We in the CW have had to resist the attacks on our members' pay and conditions of work because of our regulators' liberalising remit of price competition and supposed cost efficiencies. A key underlying factor of Royal Mail disputes of recent years has been the race to the bottom that results from this. But on the surface, who would disagree with the aim of lower prices and customer choice? All sounds good, doesn't it? This remit, though, in the end is counterproductive for true value for the customer. In the postal sector, liberalisation has generally benefited big business customers, but it's proved overwhelmingly negative for ordinary postal users and postal workers. Many companies get away with using very low-cost employment models, typically relying on bogus self-employed owner-drivers in the parcel sector, for example, and they are denied basic employment rights. The current rigged competitive models in the communication industries are facades. Behind them, mega profits are made by major companies dividing the spoils between themselves, whilst customers and workers lose out. The other seriously damaging effect of liberalisation has been inadequate and stop-start investment in infrastructure. And nowhere is the effect of this short-sighted approach more evident than in the area of telecoms infrastructure development. Like Post, the telecoms network is a natural monopoly. BT is the only UK telecom company with the economies of scale, the capability and the interest in delivering universal broadband across the UK. But it can't do any of this without investment. The government has recently announced ambitious targets for rolling out full fibre and 5G networks across the UK. Full fibre alone would cost £30 billion. To have consistent investment for networks of the future on which our economy depends, we need a shift to a new model of regulation, one which breaks from the failed orthodoxy of price competition, one with greater democratic control, which allows for long-term rational planning for the public good. It's only this that can ensure proper universal services. Congress, we need a government that can deliver a new model of regulation and alternative models of ownership. We need a new government that delivers for customers, for workers and for our country's prosperity. We support the motion.
Thank you, CW Prospect. Do you need your right to reply? I hear silence. I take that as a no. Congress, I move you to the vote. Will all those in favour of motion 25 please show? Thank you. All those against, please show. That's carried. I call paragraph 314, composite motion number 3, Grenfell Tower. The General Council will support the composite motion, which is to be moved by the FBU, seconded by Unite, supported by UNISON. I have other speakers from PCS and the AUE. Will they all please come to the front? Thank you. FBU, the floor is yours.
President, Congress, brothers and sisters, last year we came here to move a resolution in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire, and we make no apologies for raising the issue again. This was the worst fire in living memory, the worst fire since the Blitz. An entire block of residential flats destroyed, with 72 people losing their lives as a result. An appalling incident, one that we've described indeed as an atrocity. And I ask Congress to think for a minute of what would have happened had this been a terrorist incident, for example, if 72 people died as a result of a terrorist attack. What would the government, what would the state have done in response to that? I suggest that we would have seen far more action, far more effort than we've seen in the aftermath of 72 working class people dying in their own homes in West London. And that highlights for us what's the problem at the heart of this. Complacency at central government, complacency about public safety, complacency about fire policy that goes back through this government but predecessors over more than 3 decades. And a question that arises in the heads of anyone who thinks about that appalling event is how the hell in the 21st century, in one of the richest boroughs, in one of the richest cities in the world, can this even happen? We now have a public inquiry, and the Fire Brigade Union is a core participant in that public inquiry. And I think for us, considering the role of trade unions today in our 150th anniversary and our own centenary, the work that we're doing says something about the role of trade unions in relation to our members, but also our role of trade unions in relation to our engagement with communities. Because in the London Fire Brigade, more than 1,000 London firefighters have been interviewed by the police as part of this process. Interviews that in some cases are lasting 6 and more hours. Think about the impact of that on a workplace. In every single one of those interviews, we've had a trade union representative sitting in to advise and support our members. That's a huge resource requirement for us as a union. At the Grenfell Tower inquiry itself, we attend every day to support the welfare of those people giving evidence and to provide support alongside the London Fire Brigade. At the same time, we are engaged in research to provide evidence to the inquiry and to the wider political debate that needs to take place. And it is staggering, as we assess that evidence, that Grenfell Tower was actually safer before it was refurbished than after it was refurbished. Grenfell Tower was safer in 1974 than it was in 2017. And that raises some pretty fundamental questions about what's going on in terms of housing policy in Britain. Every single fire safety provision within that building completely failed. Compartmentation failed. The windows were badly fitted and were not fitted into the body of the building but sat outside the building. They were made of flammable material. The fire doors didn't comply with regulations. The fire lifts that firefighters rely on didn't work. The ventilation system that should have kept the fire escape clear of smoke did not function. There was no wet riser to provide additional water to firefighters. And of course, behind it all, the entire building clad in flammable cladding, effectively wrapped in petrol. Who in their right minds would wrap a building that people live in petrol? It's a criminal incident that needs to be addressed as we go forward. 12 minutes it took from the fire to spread from the 4th floor to the 23rd floor. And at that time, there were only 20 firefighters present at the incident. And within 45 minutes, entire building smoke logged across the landing and the stairs, meaning that escape or evacuation had become virtually impossible. And at that time, only 50 firefighters present. So firefighters that night, for us, faced an utterly impossible situation where every single element of the building that they rely on to do their job utterly failed because it had been compromised during the refurbishment. They have equipment and procedures to allow them to do things, but those procedures couldn't be applied, so they put their lives at risk in an attempt to save the lives of others. They're not superheroes, they're just working people trying to do their job. And we've seen at that inquiry 6 weeks or so of firefighter evidence. It has been extremely harrowing for us who followed it closely, and certainly for those workers, those trade union members who have given evidence during the course of that. And I'll finish on this Congress. We think that behind this, we were told not to politicise Grenfell Tower, but when you analyse it, behind what happened is a system of regulation and law and inspection and enforcement that resulted from political decisions. And we say, in order to get justice, the people who made those decisions need to be held to account. Justice for Grenfell. Thank you. I move.
Thank you, FPU Unite. Second.
Conference President Maxine Loza, seconding this motion on behalf of Unite the Union. Conference, I'm a first-time delegate and a first-time speaker. Before I go into my speech, just to say this is personal for me. I am a bus driver that works in the Grenfell community. My bus route passes Grenfell Tower. My garage, we see it every single day, so we can never forget. One of my colleagues, he lost his home and he lost his daughter. He's still coming to work and we have to support him through that. So, you know, it's very touching. Congress, my union shares the pain of the Grenfell community and the FBU who rushed to their aid. In that fire, our family, union family, lost members. We lost colleagues. We lost friends. Congress, an injury to one is the concern of all. And I'm proud that Unite has risen to that ideal, providing a helping hand to our members from Grenville in their time of need. That includes supporting our members as core participants in the Grenville inquiry and adding our voice to their demand for an immediate moratorium on the use of combustible materials on high-rise blocks. Congress, the inquiry has revealed in graphic, distressing and tragic detail the impossible situation facing our brothers and sisters from the Fire Brigade Union that night. Their courage is imaginable, their bravery incalculable. Our solidarity with them is unwavering. Conference, if the inquiry is to see real justice for the victims of Grenfell, it must go further and it must be bolder. This composite motion demands that the inquiry consider the bigger question, that it brings scrutiny to the deregulation of building standards, that it draws out the undeniable link between austerity and the deadly shortcuts taken when commissioning exterior cladding, that it asks why the warnings of the tenants and their organisations were ignored until it was too late. Conference, for those things did not happen. They were not unlucky, unintended consequences. They were the results of decisions taken by people and authority, people prepared for others to shoulder the risk, by people, and out of respect for the dead, I will not mince my words, by people who are guilty and must be brought from the shadows into the light of justice. The people of Grenfell must be able to hold account each and every individual in the chain of responsibility from the minister downwards. Conference, as a mark of respect, mark of our collective solidarity with the heroes and victims of Grenfell Tower, I call upon you to support this motion.
Well done. Thank you, Unite. Unison. Got Unison? Do I have Unison? Thank you. I said Unison. That's all right. You have the floor.
Thank you. President, Congress, Ash Dobie supporting the composite on behalf of Unison. Congress, a year on, and the Grenfell Tower burning in front of our eyes still haunts me. The tragedy has transformed discussion around social housing, affordable housing, and the clear discrimination that became apparent as the hours and the days passed when we realised the significant impact that continues to affect the families and their children. The Grenfell survivors need ongoing support to rebuild their lives, and Unison stands in solidarity with them. Our members are working hard to provide support to rehouse the survivors, and this task remains a priority for all our members. However, this has been hindered by the failed Tory policies that has disseminated social housing. The Hackett review concluded that our building and fire safety regulation system is unfit for purpose, and it requires fundamental reforms to improve the fire safety of high-rise buildings. And it takes time, and it will take time before we learn the full details of the causes of the fire, the most devastating tower block fire in British history. Congress, but what has become clear in the years of cuts and austerity have strived social housing and resources needed to ensure homes are well maintained and safe. And the result of all this, human lives lost, loved ones devastated, homelessness and family displacement. The government has claimed it will bring forward legislation to overhaul the regulation system and give residents a stronger voice in an improved system of fire safety. Congress, we must ensure that the government delivers this pledge. But this must also go further. It must introduce an immediate ban on the use of combustible materials on high-rise residential buildings. It must overhaul the building regulation system by reversing the outsourcing of health and safety and building control services. And it must commit to investing in new and existing social homes to ensure that the horrific tragedy of Grenfell is never repeated. Only this can we ensure that people get access to safe homes, and the only way we can rebuild trust amongst the residents. Congress, I thank you. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much. I call PCS.
President Congress Mohammed Shafiq from PCS Union, proud to support Composite 3. Just let it sink in. 72 people killed, including many children, hundreds injured and thousands traumatized, and this in the 5th largest economy in the world. I want to pay tribute to the victims, their families and the survivors. Let them know that we in the trade union movement will never forget them and forget the fight for justice. It is important for us to recognize the powerful coming together of civic society in the immediate aftermath of that dreadful night. The churches, mosques, synagogues, trade unions, community groups, and hundreds of concerned citizens from across the country. They came with food, clothing, medicine, toys, and toiletries. They demonstrated the greatness of the human spirit, and for that we should always be grateful. Who can fail to be amazed by the bravery of the firefighters who, despite the dangers, went into that tower on that night without any concern for their own safety? The Tories claimed that they recognised their bravery, but we know it's all rhetoric and empty words. Prime Minister, if you claim to respect and honour our public servants, including firefighters, then give us a decent pay rise. PCS Union had members that lived in the tower over the last year on the instructions of our national president, Janice Godrich. The union and branch officials have helped them rebuild their lives. Our national vice president, Zita Holborn, helped set up and led the campaign for justice and is still actively involved in supporting survivors. As our statement said at the time of the fire, the Grenfell fire exposed the scale of inequality in our society, where social housing and working class communities have been neglected for generations. And for this to happen in one of the richest boroughs in the country beggars belief. And over 1 year later, we still have 50% of families in temporary accommodation. Another broken promise from the Tories. Finally, I want to utterly condemn the attack on our brothers and sisters in the fire service. On that night and every night, they put their own safety to the side and head towards danger, unaware if they're going to come home that night to their families. In my eyes, they're the true heroes. And to our FBU colleagues here in this hall and across the country, we have one clear message. PCS and our trade union movements will always stand with you. Finally, I want to ask you to never forget the victims and their families. Their struggle is our struggle, and until justice is achieved, the fight goes on. Congress, please support.
Thank you very much. Amy, been very patient. Thank you.
President, Congress, Cherie Angela Matthews, General Secretary, Artists Union, England. We stand in solidarity with the 72 people who died as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire and with all those affected by it. We applaud the tremendous work and bravery and risk to life faced by the firefighters and emergency services staff who were there on the night, as well as their continuing support and help for the people affected, including their own work colleagues. We also applaud and offer our support as a union to the local organisations and groups who are supporting the community to rebuild their lives as well as fight for justice. And let's get one thing straight here, which saddens and angers me in equal measure. If there is any blame or responsibility to be accepted and taken on board in regards to this tragedy, it lies with the politicians, those people who are hiding behind departments and bureaucracy whose lax regulation allowed construction companies to build houses cheaper rather than safer with combustible materials and without life-saving sprinkler systems. It lies with Tory cuts to local authority fire and rescue funding, which range from 26% to 39% between 2010 and 2016. Congress, it is a national disgrace that the Grenfell inquiry has appeared to put individual firefighters on trial, while those truly responsible, Cameron, Osborne, Hammond, Johnson, and May, are allowed to slink away from the scene with no consequences. Grenfell Tower was a building unfit for purpose. Residents repeatedly reported the dangers of living there. Those voices went unheard. It pains me that those voices are still going unheard even after the fire. And we all know that over 300 buildings have since failed building regulation tests. And disgracefully, despite Tory promises, it is residents, not construction companies, not government, who are facing an estimated £1 billion bill to make them safe. Congress, we at Artists Union England demand that we continue to stand together, keeping the pressure on government so those responsible are brought to justice, as well as making sure this tragedy can never happen again. Not on our watch. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much. FPU, do you need your right to reply? No. I'm going to call the vote. Will all those please in favour of composite motion number 3, please raise your hands. Thank you. Will all those against please show? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. I call motion 27 on night working. The General Council supports the motion, moved by the NUJ, seconded by the Musicians Union. I have a speaker from the NEU listed to support. If you would come to the front.
Sian Jones for the National Union of Journalists, moving motion 27. Congress, they keep us safe while we sleep, they administer vital health care, ensure our shops and cafes are stocked for breakfast, and they edit your morning news. They're night workers. Almost 3.2 million of us now work nights. In fact, there's 250,000 more night workers than there were 5 years ago. But while more of us are working through the night, unfortunately, workplace safeguards are slipping. Working nights is just not the same as working during the day. Saying goodnight to your friends and family and other colleagues while you yourself are just starting your working day is just the beginning of the body clock bingo. Night working is linked to health problems, including obesity, an increased risk of heart disease, some cancers, suspected contribution to stroke, stress, exhaustion. It can play havoc with your family life, as Francis O'Grady pointed out with TUC research last October. And the amenities and transport options that we all take for granted during the day are more often than not just not available for night workers. Despite strong calls from the TUC last October for better rights and protections for night workers, sadly, we've seen no progress. Across the media and creative industries, our members find themselves being asked or required to work night shifts without reasonable safeguards and allowances. And we know that older women in particular struggle with working overnight hours. We hear stories every week of media workers coming off the night shift so tired that they're almost falling asleep at the wheel driving home, and that's something that's concerning and dangerous for all of us. Perhaps most worryingly, recently we've seen an increased use of outsourced occupational health departments who are overturning the written letters of GPs and consultants advising that somebody is not fit for night work. Who would have thought it? Outsourced private health experts paid for by employers backing up the position that those employers want. It sounds all too familiar, but it's a dangerous gamble with the health of workers. As the .gov website spells out, it is vital that employers take measures to protect the well-being of night workers, but we're concerned that the current limits are not sufficient and that employers are pushing these limits in dangerous ways. So we want to see a best practice model put forward, and that's what the motion says. That should include strict limits on hours worked overnight. The current recommendation is no more than an average of 8 hours, and we think those overnight hours should be weighted. We want the best practice model to ensure a responsible rota system that allows people to reset their body clocks, consider additional payments or time off for working unsociable hours, and ensure safe and supportive transport arrangements for commuting to and from the workplace. Congress, we need to shine a light on the working standards that people who work when it's dark experience. Night workers do deserve better. Please support.
Thank you, NUJ. To be seconded by the Musicians' Union. Just take your time.
Chair, Conference. Barbara White, Musicians' Union, seconding motion 27 on night working. There are similar strains placed on our members as those recognised by the National Union of Journalists. The first paragraph of the motion mentions better conditions not always being reflected. Being a musician isn't a glamorous profession, but one which demands hard work, frequently for little pay. As a member of the public, you enter the venue frequently walking on a deep piled carpet, but where the carpet ends, it's quite a different story. Sometimes the working conditions are appalling. Lack of dressing rooms and toilets, tables and chairs stacked everywhere. It is a known fact that the impact of antisocial hours can lead to health issues. Night workers are likely to have irregular eating habits, and a poor diet can lead to all sorts of problems. They're also prime candidates for depression. They're also less likely to sleep for the required amount of time during the day. For somebody who is self-employed, this is extremely serious, because for them it is no play, no pay. Getting to a gig with a musical instrument can be difficult, but it is much more difficult getting home late at night. There are fewer buses and trains, and having to wait around can be very intimidating. You are waiting and holding a valuable musical instrument, not a bag of carrots and onions. Mind you, the way Brexit's going, the carrots and onions might become more valuable. If you have a car, chances are you will still have to walk, as it is very difficult to park near a venue in central London or in the centre of other cities. Using public transport doesn't appear to be safe late at night, so maybe it is time to consider the use of taxis for these workers as a best practice model. It really is time to protect this almost invisible group of workers. Whilst we're sleeping, they're working. Please support this motion so that we can ensure they're working in a safe environment, both inside the workplace and out. Thank you. Please support.
Thank you very much. NUJ, do you need your right to reply? I've done it again. I've missed out the NEU. How could I have possibly done that? Can we just wait? Thank you.
Chair, Congress. You may wonder why an education union is speaking in support of this motion. Well, just like many other sectors, we have a dedicated, seldom heard, and often invisible workforce. Late night and overnight workers doing vital work and delivering essential services in our schools and on behalf of our schools and colleges. No matter if they're late night cleaners or waking night support staff in our residential special schools, no matter the role or the job, these essential workers and their pay and working conditions need to be brought into the light of day so they can be better supported by our movement. No longer should we take for granted this committed and indispensable workforce. These are real people doing real jobs that make a real difference. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you very much. NUJ, do you need your right to reply? No. I'm going to call the vote. Will all those in favour of motion 27 please show? Thank you. All those against, please show. That's carried. Thank you. I call composite number 4, healthcare workers and workplace violence in prisons. The General Council support the composite motion, moved by the College of Podiatry, seconded by GMB, supported by community.
President, Congress, Martin Furlong, College of Podiatry, moving composite motion number 4, healthcare workers and workplace violence in prisons, and very much welcoming the amendments from the GMB and community. In 2017, the number of reported assaults on prison staff had risen by 25% on the previous years. Excuse me. A recent study looking at large prisons showed that the highest concentration of workplace violence, at 44%, occurred in adult male prisons. Over a quarter of these reported incidents involved physical abuse. We've also seen in the last few weeks prisons put into special measures due to unhygienic conditions and staff shortage. All this is due to ongoing budget cuts from the Conservatives' austerity programme. I need not to explain to Congress how working in these conditions and being abused can have long-term damaging effects on both the physical and mental well-being of the staff and our members. Heightened stress and anxiety levels are commonplace following any traumatic incident. Our comrades in the POA are working under incredible strain as a result of this government's continued refusal to properly fund the prison services. Podiatrists, our members, regularly work in prisons across the country, looking after and educating prisoners about their foot health, playing an important role in the care of prisoners. Podiatrists, physiotherapists, nurses and doctors and other healthcare professionals should not have to face fear of violence and abuse when they go to work each day, nor should prison staff themselves or other working people who, as part of their daily work, interact with prisoners. College of Podiatry members have reported to us a lack of training given to healthcare professionals coming into the prison environment, including how to keep themselves safe at work.
However, the college recognises the hard work of the prison staff. The reality is that 7 years of austerity and underfunding into the prison system have left those that work in them overstretched, vulnerable and unsafe. In July 2017, Peter Clark, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, warned that staffing levels in many establishments are too low to maintain order. Prisons themselves are facing disastrous reductions in funding, leading to understaffing. Sorry, I'll read that again. I'll move on to the next paragraph. At the same time, the Justice Secretary, David Gauke, says prison reform is his top priority. Well, we say to Mr Gauke that talk is cheap and we need to see some action. Our members and the work that they do is too valuable to be unprotected, under-resourced and left vulnerable. Therefore, Congress calls upon the TUC to highlight and campaign on the issue of workplace violence for prison staff, including healthcare workers and others, and improve funding into the prison sector to make it a safe place for all to work. I move the composite. Thank you.
Thank you very much. GMB to second. Can I just check that I've got the POA and the UCU ready to speak as well? I have. Thank you very much.
President Congress, Rahan Razam seconding composite 4 on behalf of the GMB. Congress, nobody goes to work to be assaulted, yet every day workers are attacked in the line of duty. Take our public sector workers. Who in the right mind would be aggressive and violent against workers? Who are there for us throughout our lives? Sadly, as all public service unions in this hall can testify, no one is safe or immune from attack. Our members, from ambulance services to school support staff, report jaw-dropping amounts of violence against them. In health, over 14,000 recorded assaults took place against ambulance workers in the last 4 years, an incredible 34% increase. The assaults include stabbings, bites, physical and sexual assaults. And only recently, GMB research highlighted how half of school support staff have experienced violence at work. The testimonies from our members is truly heartbreaking. We have had members who've been stabbed and attempted to be strangled, been punched, bitten and attacked in the neck with scissors. One member had a car driven at them, and worst of all, Congress, a member of ours miscarried after being kicked in the stomach. No one should be told that facing violence is just part of the job, yet our members do their jobs with complete professionalism, but everyone has their breaking point. Congress, we are not powerless, so I'm proud to say GMB's leading role in the successful Protect the Protectors campaign, working with many sister unions. Together, we took to Parliament the experiences of emergency service workers, along with our demands to Parliament, and I'm pleased to say we won. This Thursday, royal assent will be given to the Assault on Emergency Workers Offences Bill. From that point, there will be increased sentences for those assaulting emergency service workers while doing their job. And the GMB ensured that sexual assault was included in this legislation, as well as physical assault. This was crucial because it was our member, Sarah Kelly, who in 2016 was sexually assaulted by a predatory patient while working for Yorkshire Ambulance Service. We wouldn't have won this campaign without Sarah and others who've shown immense courage in sharing their experiences. Members making the difference. And I know sometimes politicians get a bad name, and rightly so, but I do want to put our record of thanks to Labour MPs Holly Lynch and Chris Bryant, who secured this vital legislation. Protect the Protectors is a trade union victory, and yet there's so much more we need to do. Congress, I urge you to support.
Thank you very much indeed. Community, thank you.
Congress, Janet Sarsfield, a first-time delegate and a first-time speaker from Community. I'm speaking in support of the Composite 4. Congress, it is totally unacceptable that anybody, wherever they work, should suffer from physical abuse or the fear of abuse, just for making a living for themselves and their families. I want you to imagine that going to work knowing there's a chance that you will leave emotionally drained, battered and bruised. Imagine having a job where there's a high chance of being assaulted. Imagine being told that the risks of the job are just part of your job, get on with it. That's what working life can be for me and too many of my colleagues who work in the justice sector. When I joined the sector, of course, I knew about the risks, but believed that my employer, and failing that, the government, would protect me. Yet since I joined the sector, things have got worse. With new psychoactive substances streaming into our prisons, I know that my colleagues are facing increasing risks at work. In the last year alone, assaults on prison staffs have gone from up to 26%. That's a staggering 24 assaults every day. Every day, 24 assaults. The sad thing is we know how to make the justice sector safer. We know that we need more staff that are better trained to handle difficult situations and difficult prisoners. And we know that if we want to stop the exodus of experienced people leaving our profession, then prison officers and those working need better pay and more respect for the job that they do. We know that urgent action and more funding is needed to tackle the new psychoactive substances in our prisons. Yet the only prisons that get anywhere near the necessary funding and support are those that are already in terrible conditions. Congress, I can tell you now that the government's approach of investing £30 million in the worst 10 prisons in the country is like putting a plaster on a bullet wound and hoping for the best. When it comes to the justice sector, it is time this government started being more proactive and less reactive. For a safer justice sector, for me and my colleagues, please support this composite. Thank you.
POA.
President, Congress, Joe Simpson, POA. Rising in support of Composite Motion 4. We, the POA, have been campaigning for a long time for a bill such as Protect the Protectors, because I will put it in these terms. Our members are being slaughtered on the landings of your prisons. They have no protection whatsoever. We, the POA, absolutely agree with all of the work that our sister trade unions have been doing, along with politicians, on Protect the Protectors. And now, finally, we're going to get something in place that will help us reduce the violence in our prisons. You heard the previous speaker from Community about new psychoactive substances. This is driving prisoners crazy. And they don't know how to stop it coming in. We do, but they won't listen to us. Why? Because they don't want the union to be part of the solution. Congress, only last week, 17 of our members were assaulted in prisons. 9 of them had to go to A&E in order to receive treatment from the various injuries. And one of the more disgusting things that I've seen in my career as a prison officer is the rise in what we call potting incidents. This is where prisoners get jugs of excrement and urine and throw it over our members. But they use that mainly against our female members because they think that's acceptable rather than hit them. Congress, I remember sitting in front of MCHUGH when he turned around and he said, I'm going to make it illegal for people to throw packages over prison walls. The day after, when we told him it hadn't stopped it, he was absolutely gobsmacked because he thought that because they had passed legislation that it would make it safer. Well, Congress, we've all seen Rory Stewart. And I'll finish on this. He's turned around and said, if he doesn't make prisons safer in 12 months, he's going to resign. So from the POA, it wasn't always our pleasure. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you, Joe, from the POA. UCU?
President, Congress. Brian Hamilton, UCU, and a proud prison educator. We hear an awful lot about statistics about violence. these statistics are human beings. They're our colleagues. They're our families. They're our co-workers. These are the important things behind the statistics. If prison violence is reduced by 10%, there's still 90% of people who are being assaulted, still 90% of people who are suffering, and still 90% of the people that we are doing little to help. The unions are the only people who seem to be getting this message out about violence in prisons. Prisons are very contained. It's all about keeping things in-house, keeping it so nobody gets to know about it. It's our job to make sure everybody gets to hear about it and everybody acts on it. And I'm just going to be brief here, but I'll just explain to you what was once said to me. It was said, well, what do you expect? You work in a prison. Well, I'll tell you what I expect. I expect what we've been working for 150 years. I expect dignity at work, I expect safety at work, and I expect to be given the resources that you as taxpayers are paying for to make sure that that job's done properly. So I would implore you, support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, UCU. Do you need your right to reply? Nope. I'm going to call the vote on composite motion number 4. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. That's carried. Congress, I'm now very pleased to welcome our next speaker from the student movement, Shakira Martin, National President of the National Union of Students. Shakira is in her second term as president, having been re-elected at NUS's national conference in April this year. She's a passionate supporter of the trade union movement and spoke at our rally for a new deal for workers in May and at the Toll Puddle. Though I have to say, I think your daughter stole the show there, Shakira. You are absolutely welcome to this Congress. I invite you to address us. Would everyone welcome Shakira Martin? Thank you.
Hello, how's everybody doing this morning? So I've got a lot of energy, so I feed off the audience. So I'm going to try and make you laugh and give you a bit of energy. I'm going to go a bit off script at first. Firstly, I'm really, really honoured to be here to celebrate the 150 years. Being the first black woman in the role and the second to not go to university, I think it's really important that we show alternative routes. But also, I would really, really like to give a shout out to Frances and Sally. Doing this job as a woman, as a mother, is really, really difficult. And these two ladies, as well as many grassroots organisations and women in there, have supported me in my role. It is very challenging, and they have really, really helped mentor me in this role. And I just wanted to give a round of applause to them as well. As the President of the National Union of Students, I represent 7 million students and apprentices across the UK. Students who are very often workers and apprentices who are your colleagues in the workplace. We share the same challenges and we can do so much more by working together. For this reason, NUS is and will always work and be a friend to the trade union movement. Working in partnership with you, standing in proper solidarity with you when your members take action to defend their rights. I want to congratulate TUC on its 150-year birthday and thank you in so many ways for what you have done to transform the lives of workers in that time. See, what's funny is I thought that politics started in 2013 when I got political. It's obviously been going on for 150 years, so standing on the shoulders is really important. But my trade union family, I know there's a lot to celebrate, but I want to talk to you about the next 150 years. And you can't talk about that without talking about education. I want to talk about what education will look like, what work will look like. I want to talk about my experience in education and what education will look like for my children and their children. Things have changed for the people in the UK since I started college. They've changed over my life, and I'm not sure it's getting any better. When I was elected NUS president last year, I wanted to talk about poverty. When we talk about students, many of us think about the typical 18-year-old going to university. People think of students whose parents give them a weekly allowance or pay their rent in big halls, in big universities, in big cities. But NUS represents many more students than that. And we have to remember those students who don't have those privileges. The single mother trying to work and study at a further education college. The apprentice who's being paid poor poverty wages, maybe even below the minimum wage they're entitled to. To the working class student at university whose loans have almost run out and who is making the choice between eating and eating. There's a common myth that we say, if you're working or educating yourself, you can get on, you can get by. The myth says that students have enough unless they're reckless with money. And people say students are reckless with money. Society likes to say the reason people are poor is because they're reckless with money, not because society demands that some people should be poor. But my trade union family, we know that is a myth. It's a myth for workers and it's a myth for students. The NUS I lead has been examining student poverty and showing exactly how class and poverty creates barriers in stopping so many students in not just getting in, but getting on. We've heard from apprentices, learners, students, from academic providers to sector agencies, from campaigning organisations, charities, and of course, the trade unions, including TUC. And we found that class and poverty in further and higher education are linked. The decisions made about funding of education and students, the assumptions made about students and learners is too often based on a middle class assumption and perspective of people who run our institutions. And the increased cost of living together creates barriers, again, in not just getting in, but getting on. The system creates a poverty premium. That means working class students have to pay more. They pay more directly, like higher interest because they're more reliant on debt. They pay more indirectly, like higher transport costs, because they have to travel longer distances. The impact is to restrict choice, restrict access, and increase dropouts. Congress, if we are to change this, there is so much we have to do. We have one of the biggest issues facing students and young people, the B word, Brexit. But I am so proud that my National Union of Students, I feel so proud saying that, we're one of the first national organisations to come out in support of the people's vote on the final Brexit deal. And I'm even prouder that more and more of our allies in the trade union movement are coming out to the same conclusion. This botched Tory Brexit will harm workers and their rights. But more than that, this is a movement for students and workers to unite around a common area. We deserve a people's vote. Because there's nothing socialist about making working classes in this country poorer, which we know Brexit will do. There is nothing left-wing about allowing racism and fascism to run free within our society. And there is nothing progressive about turning our backs against the world. To TSS, Prospects, the Royal College of Nursing, and others, I salute you. And I urge all of us in this room to unite in proper solidarity and back a public vote, including our friends in the Labour Party. There is nothing more important for the rights and opportunity of working class young people. And as we call for a people's vote, NUS will be campaigning on a broad range of issues relating to smashing down those barriers and scrapping the poverty premium. One example, one that is important, is housing. Having a home that is right. Everybody is entitled to the right home. But the housing has to be fit for the people who live there and fit for study. And often, housing is not accessible to people on low incomes. Students often need a guarantor, even when they're estranged or independent adults. And whether they have people who can act as a guarantor and that person is in the UK, deposits and fees are disproportionate and apply to renters again and again. Housing should be affordable. Students' rent soaring, not just in the private sectors, but in our halls, in our universities too. And their excuse is, oh, we're just charging the market rate. But the cost of market rent is unaffordable for so many. What about universities and colleges, or as an apprentice? Where does the hope lie for those to have housings? What about if you have a family? What about if you've never applied for housing for themselves or their family because they won't be able to afford to study? Housing costs then becomes a trap against making their lives better through learning. I just want to take a moment to talk about what's happening in Westminster right now. The Conservatives say they're on the side of the renters. They say they're on the side of young people, of those who want to be able to live a good life and affordable housing. And they propose some great changes. But since Parliament came back, they've started to turn around on their policies. They've turned around on addressing fees for renters. They've reconsidering 3-year tenancies. They've abandoned market policy changes in this area and abandoning another generation of housing for students. This has to stop. My trade union family, all too often, government policy drives down standards and removes the right and makes it necessary to have personal debt to access housing or education. All that means is that opportunity relies on those who all that means is that opportunity relies on who your parents are, not what you can do. And this isn't just about class. A priority for NUS this year is black attainment at our universities. That means black and BME students are less likely to get an upper second or first class degree. That gap exists after you account for entry grades, types of qualification, the school which they attended. It exists after you account for the social economic background. It exists in our universities. And our universities can and must fix it. Real solutions for outcomes that disadvantage black students can benefit all of us as a society. The black attainment gap is a symptom of an issue of education. Finding a solution isn't going to be simple nor straightforward. But taking part, undressing and dismantling this isn't easy to take part of. But if we can get things right, if we can make our universities fair, it will be much better for women, disabled students, trans students, students from working class backgrounds. It can show the ways to make our colleges and universities fairer and better for everyone, black, BME or not. And giving all our students a real opportunity to transform our workplace, break the cycle of deprivation and be who they can and want to be. So, my trade union family, there's a lot of work to do over the next 150 years. And I don't want it to be the next 150 years before we see a next black woman president leading NUS or any of these organisations. But let's be ambitious for our students. Let's be ambitious for our society. One thing that I've learned, I'm going off script here because I feel like it's really important to drop it in, but one thing that I've learned is that the game has stayed the same and the players have changed. Nobody wants to play Monopoly no more. So I put a shout out to you. Let's change the game. Use this opportunity to do things different. I want to see decent housing, decent homes to be considered as a right that we all should have. I want choosing to get on with study to be something our society can celebrate. I want study not only to be about money, but to be about being a bigger and better person. I want things to get better. And I know that when we come together and we stand in proper solidarity, and the reason why I say proper is because sometimes we just say solidarity at the end of a speech and don't really mean it. Proper solidarity. You know, the people that's laughing know what I'm talking about. There's more that unites us than divides us. And I am sure if we work together, over the next 150 years, Kai Shay will be standing here, my 7-year-old daughter. Because student unions and trade unions are partners, and us working together will mean a better society. This is for us all. Thank you very much for having me.
She just said, I'm from Peckham, I don't cry, make them sit down.
The pollen in their air.
Shakira, really thank you for that. Listen, Congress, we've run over time, but I think that was well worth it, but we've completed our business for this morning. I've got a couple of things I need to remind you of. Meetings taking place this lunchtime. They're going to be displayed on the screens behind me, and they're on pages 11 and 13 of your guide, or on the leaflet in the wallet. Please be advised that the BDA Food Security and Sustainability Fringe meeting has been cancelled. That's quite worrying. Okay, anyway, Congress, this hall will be closed now between now and 1:40. Please make sure you take anything you need when you leave. You'll not be able to come back in here until after 1:40. One other thing I need to say to you, tomorrow night, hosted by Slater and Gordon, which is very close to here in their offices, there's going to be an art exhibition by the husband of one of the Grenfell survivors. It's something that's worth you going along to. At the same time, there's going to be a Windrush political and legal strategy meeting. Details to be found from PCS. Anyone else who hands me a leaflet like that, I ain't going to read it out, but Zita got me, so well done, Zita. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and I'll see you soon.